Hi everyone, Leonard Ulrich here with something new. Ever since I released Volume 1 in March 2011, my number one regret has been being unable to answer all the emails that come my way. Keep in mind that I get about 40 to 50 emails every single day. And while I read every single one of them, I'm simply unable to respond to each and every one of them. Most of the emails that come my way thank me for Volume 1 and ask me about Volume 2, which I'll get to tonight, and simply want to ask me some questions. I got an email about 2-3 weeks ago from Sam Swanson and his friend Daniel Gow, who wanted to know whether I do interviews. And the answer is definitely yes. You can check out a whole bunch of interviews that I've done over the past 2 years on the Leonard Ulrich channel. And there's more to come, believe me. And there are two guys about to expand their families who manage a campground or are affiliated with a campground in upstate New York and have gone from the music industry to something obviously completely different. And I thought we would talk for about an hour, and it turns out that we had about a 3-hour conversation about everything under the sun. And a whole bunch of topics are covered. And I asked at the start that they record their conversations with me using different mics, and that I would do the same, and that they would email me their MP3 files, and I would string it all together and put it up on my channel for you to enjoy. And I've done just that. We started out our conversation with discussing why the women in our lives tend not to be as involved or intense about the New World Order as the average male does. And there's a reason for that, and you'll hear it in our conversation right at the start. We get into the issue of when Volume 2 is coming out, what the status is on that. I know you probably want to know yourself. And so for the next 3 hours, sit back, enjoy a good conversation with 3 Christian conspiracy theorists talking truth in a world full of lies. Enjoy.
They support us in this, but then they give us a hard time about it sometimes, so.
You know what? That is entirely natural because women aren't wired that way. They're wired for relationships.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you are the opposite. You have the opposite role of that relationship, which is perfectly fine.
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny though. Like my wife does find some aspects of the New World Order interesting. Like she's really into the health aspect and like growing our own food and that kind of stuff. So it does give us some room to relate, on certain aspects. So.
Well, it's not surprising that she would have an interest in that regard because that is a nurturing aspect, like feeding your family. And you don't want to feed your family garbage. And she's on the right track because I'll tell you, I just read a study in Natural News, not that I accept everything on that website, but the average fast food hamburger patty contains 2% actual meat.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I guess we're fortunate in that we just bought a half a cow then. So.
Oh, hey, you're very smart because you've tracked down your food at the source, and that's where eventually I want to get to.
Actually, Leonard, if you were interested in purchasing that, they actually purchased that from my in-laws. They have an organic beef farm 2 minutes from where Sam and I are right now. So we could probably get you meat at a good price if you're ever looking into that.
Well, that's very tempting, but I'll tell you what, I have to save up about $8,000 for the next generation of Apple products that are coming out and maintain of a standard. Because I'll tell you what, my 5-year-old Mac Pro is just being used to the absolute maximum.
I bet.
Yeah, I've started my own video production company now called Imagine Productions. And I'll do, let's say, YouTube adverts. I'll literally come on site and shoot an entire ad program for people and then put it up on YouTube for them.
That's great. I saw you did post on your YouTube channel something you had done for your church for the few days that you had it up or whatever it was.
Yeah, that's right. People got a little bit concerned about copyright violation, and I'm saying, look, it's perfectly all right to do that, but if you want to be, absolute sticklers about it, then I'll take it down. I certainly what I've done is delist it. So along with my videos, my feature video, it still exists, but I have to send it to someone in a link in an email.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so volume 1 is still up then.
Oh yeah, and it's still being viewed by people. And what I have to do over the next week is recut the film into a series of about 10 to 20 minute segments, which contain an advertisement for how to get it on DVD film from Cutting Edge Ministries, because they approached me to sell my film on a commercial basis, because I got requests every single day. Can we have this on DVD, please? And I thought, well, no one would want that on DVD because everyone's on a download age. But you know what? People want to see it on a big screen, and they want to see it again and again, and they want to see only certain parts of it. So there is a market out there for it, and because I'm selling it on a commercial basis, and by the way, I don't apologize for that, because 2 million people pretty well have seen my movie for free. So if anyone backs me into a corner and says, "Oh, you're just in it for the money," I'm going, "Look, buddy, it's been 5 years and I haven't made a single dollar so far." So I'll have to recut the film and put up about 40% of it, as much as possible, and say, look, this is how you can get the DVD from Cutting Edge.
So when volume 2 comes out, which I think everyone wants to know when that is going to be, will we have to purchase that on DVD, or will that be available again through YouTube?
Well, you know what?
Not that I have a problem purchasing that. I will absolutely support you in that way.
Well, I appreciate that. I have a brand new marketing strategy. Because I signed an exclusive deal with Cutting Edge, I need to honor that. Okay?
Yep.
But I'm also of the opinion that if something is done very well, people will buy it, even though they can get it off of YouTube for free. I watch about 20 to 30 movies per year, and quite honestly, only about 2 to 3 movies per year are worth my time. And I will buy Blu-ray copies of those movies. And I have no problem, doing that. So what I'm going to do is upload to YouTube in a single file, high def, and I'll simply say at the start and at the end of the movie, by the way, please, if you enjoy this movie, or if you've learned something from this movie, please buy it from Amazon. So that'll be my in. That'll be the way I get some revenue from this.
Right. Which will help in the production of your later volumes as well.
Oh, totally, because I have just invested between the cameras and the computers. I have 5 high-def cameras right now, and a crane and a dolly and lighting and audio and everything else. I have a $33,000 investment.
Yeah.
Well, I would imagine. Wow.
And I've done a little bit of video work, and at that amount of money, you shopped around pretty well then for getting that amount of equipment for that amount of money.
Oh, believe me, the dream cameras I want
yeah,
start at about $33,000 each.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm talking mid-level. I have all the accessories. It's great. The cameras, in my mind, are expendable because in about 2 to 3 years, I want to go with 4K video. And that's just the awesome, the power of that 4K resolution. If you've ever seen a 4K TV, you just drop your jaw at it. It's just so powerful. And that is a medium which the church isn't really paying attention to. Yeah, we've got, Christian TV and so on. But I'm talking about using technology to expose systems of control.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something which the church is almost entirely silent on. And I think that's quite a shame because, you know what? I've just realized this. I'd say in about 10 to 15 years, what I'm doing won't be required anymore. And that is because things are going to get so obviously tyrannical that it's going to be self-evident. You know, before 9/11, you start talking the way I'm talking, and people will look at you funny.
Right.
And, you know, 1 year after 9/11, they still look at you funny. But now we're sort of on the tipping point, especially with Syria. You know, I'm honestly thankful for what is going on in Syria because the odious nature, the thinly veiled nature of this whole campaign against Syria is so obvious that the public is finally starting to wake up. And it is a pleasure to see men and women in uniform holding up signs in front of them saying, I did not sign up to fight for Al-Qaeda in a Syrian civil war.
Absolutely.
And they get it.
We were actually going to ask you what your perspective on Syria was to kind of kick off the night.
Okay.
But before we get into that, and then Sam's got most of the questions tonight because he's going to be talking about the monetary system and all of this, and he studied a lot more than that than I have. I just want to say thank you for the work that you've done and are doing. And the number one thing that I appreciate the most about your documentary is that you gave the gospel at the end. I've said it to Sam, and I've said it to everyone who I've shown it to when we're talking to about this stuff that are Christians. You know, it doesn't matter if we're talking about secret societies, the monetary system, Nephilim, angel-human hybrids, all of it. If you're a Christian and you're seeing this, it needs to drive you to the importance of sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ because they need him more now than ever before.
Absolutely. I'm so thankful that you said that because I'll tell you what, straight up, the entire point of my series is to create dissatisfaction and disillusionment with any system of worldly power so that you are driven back into the gospel. Because that's the only thing that keeps me from going insane.
Right.
Absolutely.
Before we start, Leonard, could we just ask you for your testimony? Would that be all right?
Sure. Well, I'm 43 years old. I have a Bachelor of Education, Bachelor of Arts, Wood Products Manufacturing Technology diploma. That's my just professional and personal background. But I have been attending the same Baptist church since before I was born. And I gave my life to Christ at a young age, at about age 12. And it was a very simple and moving experience. I'll never forget it because that's, of course, the start of my life as a Christian. And long story short, I went through university, went through teaching and 7 years of that. And I gave up teaching as a career because I couldn't support the secular school system anymore. There's a lot of nepotism and backstabbing in that system. And of course, the values are becoming increasingly foreign to any kind of Christian grounding.
Mm-hmm. Did you find, sorry to interrupt, but with the educational system, did you find that it was also hard to pay back your loans and make a living off of?
Well, actually, here in what you would call socialist Canada,
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble seeing the difference between Canada and America anymore.
Well, there actually is one important difference, and this is actually kind of comical. You see, in America, if there's something worth doing, it's worth overdoing. And in Canada, if there's something worth doing, it's worth getting a government grant to do it with.
Okay.
So, yeah, I left the educational field, and I got into woodworking as a hobby just to relieve the stress of teaching as I was teaching. And then I said, you know, it's much easier to work with a piece of wood than it is with the average young person's mind, although there are, thank goodness, plenty of exceptions to that. And basically in 2005, I had an awakening to the realization that we are living in the final 1% of history, and that all along for about 18 to 20 years, without me knowing it, God led me down a specific career path to prepare me to reveal that revelation to as many people as I could. And that to me was the ultimate validation. I mean, you know, going through 18 years of disillusionment is not easy. And you're wondering, you know, what is all this for? Why did I have all kinds of academic awards, being able to recall names, dates, places, faces, with a double major in history? You know, what's that? Who's that going to benefit? Well, it turns out that's going to benefit a lot of people, because now the world is my classroom, and I have reached about 2 million people online. And I get 40 to 50 emails every single day thanking me. Generally, about 80% are positive, 20% are what I call the new evangelical atheist types who love to swear at you and try to demean you. And you know what? I just take their arguments, and like any kung fu master, I just use that negative energy on themselves, not out of my own conviction, but because I just mirror what they do and unravel all their arguments, because I'm using a database of wisdom which is infinitely superior to their wisdom. It's like child's play, you know? So, quite honestly, God led me down about a 18 to 20 year path to get me where I am today. Everything from my ability to speak in public to speak off the cuff as I am right now. My historical mind, my technical mind, everything has led me to this point. And I'll tell you what, Sam and Dan, it's not an easy road, because I'll tell you a little secret. The group which is closest to my heart, the primary audience for my material, i.e., the typical Christian church, is the group which has most rejected my message.
Oh, right. I totally agree.
Generally speaking.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that the subject matters that you bring up, for the most part, people of secular, lifestyles can at least, grip onto those things more naturally than your average church goer.
Right, because we have, in our Western culture, there's very little difference between Canada and America. We have placed faith in our institutions when we have forgotten that those institutions are subject to all kinds of evil, and are being now slowly used against us. I ask the average person who has, goes to a typical middle-class church, which has, a high-tech AV system and climate-controlled sanctuary, and has a nice Canadian or American flag at the front. I say, you know what? In the first century house church movement, do you think there would be a Roman standard in the living room?
Absolutely not.
Probably not. Okay. Now, people who really object to my exposing or expose of the New World Order say things like, you should be evangelizing people. And I say, well, you know what? Forgive me for saying this, but you have wrapped the Bible in an American flag or a Canadian flag.
Yes.
Okay, and you have made your affinity to your nation so strong and so intermingled with your faith, because it really has a basis in self-justification. We are on top. 90% of the world doesn't have as the same access to the resources as we do. So because of our status compared to the vast majority of the world, God must be with us. And I'm saying, look, pride goes before the fall. Mm-hmm. And all signs are pointing towards the decline of every possible way of America and by extension all Western nations. So I said, if you don't like my message now, reality will preach it to you very soon.
Yep.
And I would have to say, Leonard, I think that through your presentations, you are evangelizing. You're pointing out truth, which points to the ultimate truth, which is the gospel, which we covered earlier.
Well, that's what I hope to do. I'm using the systems of the world, like that infamous road that Paul traveled, which was laden with statues, and instead of condemning the whole thing, Paul on Mars Hill, Paul actually points out a statue to the unknown God, and he uses that as an evangelical starting point. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm taking people's faith in the system, and I'm opening it up for what it is. And then I'm saying, oh, by the way, the only thing that is pure and wholesome and true is the faith that we all can have in Jesus Christ. And I'm not talking about religion. Religion is part of the problem. I'm
Absolutely.
talking about a relationship with Jesus.
Right, and something you just said, having faith in those institutions, you talk about, the mass majority of people. It is interesting, when you probably do get those emails from atheists and people that are just, not jiving with your message. And, to the same people, I would say even, like television, the faith in television is just, I can't believe how many people just believe what they see. It's like seeing is believing. Again, another lie from Satan. But
yeah,
it's kind of unbelievable. It's like, how many people have faith that, like this planet is this, and this is going on in space, but how many people have ever been there? If seeing is believing, then you're pretty inconsistent in that faith that you have right now. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. It has been about 9 years since I've owned a television. I have all kinds of high-tech computers and video editing equipment, but I cannot watch television. I cannot especially watch television news. I get physically upset because I'm able to deconstruct the layers of lies in real time. As a matter of fact, I can pretty well predict how a story is going to be sold depending on what network I'm watching. You've got
Oh, wow.
I'm serious.
Very
You've
nice.
got Fox News for the right wing.
Right.
You've got MSNBC for the left wing.
Yep.
And you've got the other 3 networks for anything in between. It's a beautiful full spectrum dominance coverage. And when I watch Fox News, which is supposed to be the right-wing pro-Christian news channel,
Right.
and I watch Bill O'Reilly or someone of his ilk who is just spewing lies, telling us about how Fukushima radiation is good for us because it's just like an X-ray, I can't believe what I'm hearing. You are insulting my intelligence. And when I literally watch this next time you watch Fox News.
We don't.
Okay, good. You will see ex-porn stars give you the conservative spin on Fox News, and they're all scantily clad. They're designed to appeal to the right-wing, conservative audience, but they're selling you their story based on sex.
Well,
Yep.
In other words, attractive women spouting off things that they clearly don't have a clue about what they're saying, and they're all scantily clad. And you actually type in these news reporters' names into IMDb, the International or Internet Movie Database, and about 5 to 10% of the time, they're all ex-porn stars.
I believe that. Absolutely.
And something else. I mean, even getting physically sick over the news, I can't watch a commercial. I mean, the commercials are bad enough as it is. I mean, I think it was 4 out of 5 commercials the other day. I was visiting my parents, and they do watch Fox News. And even on this so-called conservative, appealing to the Christian, persona, having, Cialis and, all these different drugs, cough medicine, from that to arthritis medication, to dog medication, 4 out of 5 in between one of those segments was, medication related. And it's like, wow, we put our faith in medication,
Well, you know what? There is a beautiful verse in the Bible, Revelation chapter 18. And, I should have memorized this. I'm going to paraphrase it. Where it talks about, the kings of the earth use sorcery to deceive the nations. That is pretty well a quote, if not a very accurate paraphrase. I'm just using... give me about 10 seconds.
Well, we've got a Bible right here, so.
Oh, okay, perfect. Revelation 18.
And to add while you're looking, you talked about the sorcery here. We're treating, most of these medications are not treating the problem, they're treating the symptoms.
Oh, they're causing the symptoms, and then they're offering their cure, which is only exacerbating the problem. But that's all by design. Right?
Right.
It's all according to the Hegelian dialectic. Offer or create the problem, control the reaction, offer the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've read half of it. Oh, yes. Revelation 18, verse 23. Okay. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Now, that's a verse talking about the Babylonian system.
Yes, because right before they are talking about come out of Babylon, my people, right?
Correct. Yes. Now, in my first volume, I said that New York fits the archetype of Babylon. I did not say that New York is Babylon.
Right.
Okay. So, in prophecy, you have typically multiple fulfillments of that prophecy, where a nation follows the archetype of something previous and suffers almost identical fate. Okay, so back to Revelation 18, verse 23. For by their sorceries were all nations deceived. Do you know that the Greek word for sorceries is pharmakia?
Yep.
Huh.
Right. And I just read, I think it was an NBC press release, 20% of the American public is on some kind of psychotropic drug. That is pharmakia. And that is just the opening act, and there's more to come. Okay, when you've got 20% of the population on some kind of mind-altering drug, when the economy crashes,
yes,
what do you think is going to happen?
Bonkers. You
got it. If only 10% of that 20% of the American population has some kind of schizoid breakdown, they're gonna put their. I hate to say this, but I'll tell you what. You look at any kind of disgusting murder of some sweet housewife butchering her kids. 99% of the time, it's because that person was off of their meds as prescribed by their doctor. Okay. And I can't imagine or articulate what is going to happen when America suffers the same fate as, let's say, Argentina, Iceland, Greece. I could go on and on and on. In other words, America will have done to her what she has done to dozens of countries in the world. It's all going to come back on her.
Yes. Hey, Leonard, in your film, you did place a lot of symbology, and this is kind of a new thing to me because, I mean, I've always been into the visual arts and such, but I've never really understood all of the symbology. You have a lot of astrological things going on with the Babylonian system.
That's right.
And I was wondering, it's really weird because I came at this, I came out here. I was a musician for 10 years, and I was always writing about time, and I don't know why. But there's always been this obsession about the concept of time kind of in my brain. And I started to think about this, and, with astrology, time becomes a mega control, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If you don't understand history, you don't know where you've come from, and you don't know where you are, and you don't know where you're going. So that is, in essence, our understanding of time. And if you don't understand biblical astronomy, there's a verse in Genesis which says, God has laid out his plans in the stars. The ancient Israelites understood this. They had their entire theology assigned to constellations. Now, I'm not talking about, what is it? Not astronomy, but astrology. I'm not talking astrology.
Talking about astronomy.
I'm talking about astronomy, right? So astrology came later on, okay? First, you have the perfect model, and then comes along the twisted evil version of it, designed to confuse and distract and deflect.
Mm-hmm.
So in my film, I was blown away by the work of the late David Flynn in his book, The Temple at the Center of Time, which clearly lays out a distance and time relationship from the Temple Mount to major historical landmarks. Or, for example, the fall of Babylon in, I believe, 538 or 438 BC. The center of Babylon is 438 or 538 nautical miles from the Temple Mount. And the Temple Mount is also 1,948 nautical miles from the Masonic landmark in the heart of London. And of course, Palestine became Israel in 1948 by the British giving up Palestine as one of their territories. And so Israel became an independent nation through the UN in 1948. And that's just two examples of about 20 examples that the late David Flynn gives. And I'm going, you know what? It's so deep and it's so obvious that you cannot help but be driven back to the gospel because the signs are everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So I guess, where do we start? Do we start with Syria and the petrodollar, or do we start with the Federal Reserve and central banks? I mean, it kind of all coincides,
Yes, yes, and yes.
So I guess I'd like you to start where you feel the best way to enter into it would be.
Okay. I always believe in starting with current events and then explaining why this is happening based on the past and where it's going. Because if you understand the past, you know the present, and you also know the future,
right.
9 times out of 10.
So for the average American, Canadian listening that doesn't know the, how do we say it, non-accidental version of history, how do we explain to them and make sense to them? Because a lot of people are wondering, why are we going to war with Syria? I've only heard this. So what are we hearing right now? You know what I mean?
Okay. The first thing that we all need to do, especially as Christians, is wipe the idea of historical evolution away from our minds, because there's no such thing. Satan has a will. I will exalt my throne above the stars. I will do this. I will do that. I will be like God.
It's always I.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So people think things just happen. Well, Satan clearly has a will. God has a will. God has given us free will. So things don't just happen. They are made to happen. And there are 3 kinds of people. Those who watch things happen, those who make things happen, and those who wonder what happened. Okay, so Syria in under 2 minutes.
Okay.
And the Federal Reserve in under 2 minutes. Every single empire from the dawn of time has always rotted from within and overreached at the same time. It is true with the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the Nazi Empire, the Soviet Empire, and every single empire. So why does anybody think that America should be any different based on 5,000 years of history? Like, wake up.
Well, then I think that would be because they don't know 5,000 years of history.
Oh, they know about Miley Cyrus and the NFL.
Whoa.
Don't touch the NFL, Leonard, please.
Well, no, because that's
we
our
show that
state
in
religion,
church,
right?
Leonard.
Yeah, we have our big Super Bowl parties.
We actually do have Super Bowl parties at our church, and I'm wondering, are we really reaching out to the community that way? Is that really what God wants us to do?
You know what? I said something off the cuff to my cousin 3 years ago, and he just stopped in his tracks and goes, "That's a nugget, Leonard." And I said, you know what? We have made a religion out of sport, a sport out of mocking religion, and all we really need is a relationship with God.
So true.
I'm going to quote you on that a lot.
There you go. It just comes to me because not because I'm so smart, but because I've got a particular grounding, and I'm just using that grounding, and I'm casually, non-egotistically communicating that grounding. I'm not saying I'm smarter than you. I'm saying I've been trained in areas that matter. The NFL does not really matter.
It's not news.
No, it's entertainment. That's all that it is.
Amusement, which
Yes.
is another interesting word. But
it is bread and circuses.
And I would just wanted to say, I'm sorry that I'm cutting in here, but with sports, I mean, I've always thought of it this way. I'm sure you've thought of it, but I mean, I've never been a big sports person. I think anything can become a distraction or an idol if you let it. But with sports, it seems as though there's this almost like this breeding going on while you're raised in this family from this place to support that team. You know what I mean? And that just perfectly primes you for whatever party you're going to jump into and follow through politics or whatever. And for me, it's interesting because we base what are sports teams based off of? Location, which is pretty much out of all children's control, right? I mean, we can't move ourselves anywhere else. So it's kind of a basis like, oh, my town's better than your town. Well, is that really true? You know, and people will get so insanely nuts about, cutting each other down about this stuff, where it honestly gets so serious, And I mean, and some of it's just playful, but it seems like it just breeds prejudice almost.
Well, I'll tell you what. The Romans perfected the art of social domination and control. At one point in the history of Rome, which was a city-state, which is a whole concept of itself, there were more slaves than citizens. And that was tolerated for several generations because of the huge spectacles the Roman elite would serve up to the masses. I'll just give you one example. The gladiatorial fights 2,000 years ago were, in terms of a spectacle, far better than any NFL game and Super Bowl halftime show. There is evidence to suggest that the Circus Maximus had the ability to be temporarily flooded, and they would haul in naval ships into the arena and reenact naval battles with sharks in the arena.
I've heard of that before.
I have not heard that.
That is based on historical fact. They had the ability to divert a river. They would salt the water, which would rise in temperature because it's baking on the ground, which is saturated from a creek or an underground river which ran right beside the Circus Maximus. And they would do exactly what I just said. And for a Caesar who typically went mad. I mean, the youngest Caesar to assassinate his father was at age 14.
Huh.
To imagine raising a 14-year-old kid who kills you because he wants to be Caesar. And we have Caesars marrying their horses and Caesars committing suicide just because they can. It makes no sense. And so back then, the leadership was insane. And I'm looking at our leadership tonight, and I'm saying, look, John Kerry, he's not altogether there. I mean, there's something wrong with him physically as he's giving his testimony. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that as a partisan slight. I'm saying there's something wrong with the man. And when you understand that John Kerry was a tomb mate to George W. Bush, then there's no distinction between the red team and the blue team anymore. Mm-hmm. It's all the same agenda. Right. So Syria. Syria is about one thing, the petrodollar. Since 1971, the US dollar should have crashed 3 or 4 times over, but it didn't, because of the work of one evil genius named Henry Kissinger. He approached the Saudis, King Faisal, back in about 1972, 1 year after the US dollar was taken off the gold standard, okay? And he said, I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. If you sell all your oil to the world in US dollars only, we will buy a generous percentage of all of our energy requirements from you. And the Saudis, along with some other conditions, accepted. And the Saudis pretty well steer OPEC. So what the Saudis do, OPEC pretty well follows. And that arrangement of the OPEC nations selling their oil in US dollars only has generally worked until about the year 2000. That is when Saddam Hussein wanted to sell his oil in euros. Big mistake. You don't mess with the New World Order's currency blood supply, which is the US dollar. That, by the way, is, if we could find a replacement for the US dollar that wasn't controlled by the New World Order, the New World Order would literally dissolve. Okay. Mm-hmm. So anyways, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So that's just a pipe dream. So back to Saddam Hussein. That is why Saddam Hussein had to be labeled a terrorist and in league with Al-Qaeda and possessive of weapons of mass destruction. So I still speak with Christians today who say that Saddam Hussein really had weapons of mass destruction.
Oh, yeah.
And I will show them clips of the former president of the United States saying that it turns out that Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction, and they won't believe it. And I'll tell you why they don't believe it. Because they have associated a trusting, caring, lying figure by the name of George W. Bush with the absolute shock of 9/11, and they have literally been psychologically traumatized so that they can't but help believe the lies.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And you can't but help believe the lie because the consequences of believing the truth that your eyes can see are just too stressful, so you end up believing the lie. And
right.
This is what I'm up against.
Right.
So Saddam Hussein had to go, and he certainly went. And remember, his first sin was angering OPEC and the U.S. in the late 80s and early 90s until Operation Desert Storm by over-pumping oil because he wanted to get rid of his foreign debt.
Oh, shame on him.
Yeah. So the world was literally flooded with oil, cheap oil, which meant that the United States was getting less of a kickback. So Saddam managed to tick off OPEC and the United States, and he literally asked the American ambassador, April Glaspie, what would the United States' response be if I invaded Kuwait? And April Glaspie told him to his face, we have no opinion on the Arab conflicts such as your dispute with Kuwait. So Saddam Hussein said, okay, looks like I'm going to invade Kuwait. And he certainly did in short order. And of course, we trapped him. So he was an evil dictator then. Never mind the fact that he was an evil dictator used against the Iranians 10 years before. Just forget about that. Blot that out of your mind. Never mind the fact that we gave him poison gas, which he used against his own Kurdish population. Blot that out of your mind. Never happened. And Saddam Hussein had to be killed essentially 3 times over. First against the Iranians, then against the Gulf War I fiasco, and then in the War on Terror in 9/11. It's handy when you can pretty well kill a dictator that you've controlled all along 3 times over. So then it came along Muammar Gaddafi, and this is all related. Because Gaddafi, who's literally been stoned on opium for a couple decades, he's just no. I'm serious. You watch.
How do we believe
you watch
you?
the guy's speeches. He's half baked, and
Wow.
but he did a lot of good. But he's still an evil North African dictator. He was introducing the idea of the gold-backed North African dinar.
Right. I know that.
Right. You don't do that. You don't mess with the New World Order's currency, which is the American dollar. So he suffered the same fate that Saddam did.
It's a pattern.
Yeah. And now we get the third act, which is Syria. Now, do I support Assad? No. But I'll tell you what, life in Syria under Assad, and life in Libya under Gaddafi, and life in Iraq under Saddam Hussein, it was better than it is right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how can we fight Al-Qaeda in Pakistan, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and then support Al-Qaeda in Syria? Somebody please explain that to me, because I'm about to become schizophrenic. Okay? And I don't know if you've seen it, but I had to see it. I'm not going to upload it because this thing is just too disgusting to see, literally, Christians being beheaded slowly with dull, small knives. Okay, I had to watch that. To literally see Christians being crucified under the Al-Qaeda-controlled squares throughout Syria. You know, you get pictures of bloated, blackened bodies that are hanging from crosses, and they just leave them up there as a sign to all. How can anybody support that? And by the way, where is the Christian anti-war movement? Where is it? How much is enough? By our silence, we take a stand. And I'm just sick of it. Because people say, oh, now you're making a political statement. And I look at them and say, am I? Am I really telling you who to vote for? Or am I just saying, I just don't want anything to do with these satanic, die-hard Muslims that we have to support because we have to rally around the flag, because we have to support our U.S. dollar, which gives us 501c3 church designation. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right.
And so I get really worked up in this topic, as you can tell.
Oh, we do too.
We absolutely relate with you, Leonard. And I would say Christians even go to the further extreme. Not only are they not silent, a lot of times they're in full support of this. You know, let's go over there. Let's intervene.
And do what? Train Al-Qaeda?
Well, we did before. We might as well, brush them up.
Yeah, exactly. The arms are coming from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, because Qatar is swimming in natural gas. And a decade ago, a huge natural gas pool was discovered in the Mediterranean off the coast of Syria. That's still Syrian waters. It would be no problem for Syria to tap into that and ship it to every home in Europe, especially considering how the short distance that's involved. But Qatar doesn't like that. Now, Syria is pro-Russia, pro-China, but Qatar and Saudi Arabia are pro-US dollar. And Iran is also pro-Russian and pro-Indian because Syria and Iran are starting to do the ultimate sin. They're starting to sell their oil for some gold. You don't do that. Now, the United States military is stretched so thin that it's just really fighting a war in Syria by proxy. It's just literally handing cash over to the Saudis, who I have an official memo where 1,200 of the worst criminal types in Saudi Arabia were told, either you fight for Al-Qaeda in Syria or we will chop off your head.
Wow.
That's right. So they're coming from Saudi Arabia, trained in jihad by the Saudis, dumped into Syria and trained by special forces like Rangers, okay?
Huh.
In Syria with Saudi Arabian gas and Qatari rocket launchers. It's so insidious. You can put the pieces together once you see the game for what it is. And all the stuff is pretty well homemade. And it's very crude, very ineffective, but it does kill hundreds, about 1,200 people. But that is nothing compared to what we've done in Iraq and so on. And this is all designed to protect the US dollar, because the only thing propping up the US dollar is the fact that most countries in the world, with the exception of Syria and Iran, are selling their oil in US dollars, and that creates demand for US dollars, and that's the only thing so far at this point in history which gives the US dollar any value. Anything is only worth what somebody else is willing to pay you for it. If you have an old bicycle in the garbage dump, it might be worth $5. But if you can prove that some famous Hollywood actor rode that bicycle, suddenly it might be worth $5,000, right? Because some schmuck is willing to pay you for that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because, again, when I was at my parents' house, on the news, they had back to back. They were talking about the new museum that's going in for 9/11 in New York, which is another subject in itself. But
I'll open a little shop down the street.
Being someone who's listened to your interviews, covering another subject was Michael Jackson's death and all of the different items now that we're selling of Michael Jackson's, like his glove and all kinds of things, and the ridiculous sums of money that people would pay for it,
We all want a shot at fame. We think that by owning these objects, we somehow enhance our own lives. You can't take it with you. What is the point?
I don't know.
Edward L. Bernays wrote a book about 100 years ago called Propaganda. And he said, we are going to appeal to people's vanity. And we are going to put people in a state of arrested development so that they are easier to control. And I see 31-year-olds acting like they're 13. I just can't handle it. It's like, what, am I still back in junior high teaching, right? It's so sad because we are dumbed down, and the more news we watch, the less we know.
Not just the news. I mean, the more movies we watch, the more shows we watch, the more music we put into our ears. I mean, all of it, You know, I mean, we're distracted. We're just constantly distracted, yet clinging on to the next thing that comes about.
Well, because we need constant entertainment, because we can't deal with reality anymore. Why would anyone want reality? And by the way, one of the greatest ways to induce ADHD in any child is to sit that 6-month-year-old, 8-month-year-old, 12-month-year-old in front of the idiot box. Because especially when it comes to commercials for kids' products, a 30-second commercial will contain as many as 45 to 50 edits. That means there is something going on, an edit from one scene to another, one camera angle to another, one object on the screen to another in less than a second.
Mm-hmm.
The average adult cannot process images that fast, let alone a child. So what the child does, if he or she is increasingly exposed to television, is say to his or her own brain subconsciously, the television is what the pace of life is really all about, and reality is something that I cannot process. So because things aren't thrown at me at an increasing pace, I'm going to act out because everything is so slow. I can't wait for my next visual fix.
Oh man, and that you said it. I mean, patience. How about patience? We don't have that anymore. I mean, from our cell phones, from texting to, I mean, we don't even know how to communicate anymore because we're just, for example, you go to work, the average job, how many people are around you texting their wives and husbands, and then they have nothing to talk about when they get home.
One of the greatest things that we can teach our children from about the age of 3 and up is called lap time. Now you're going to sit in my lap for 15 minutes and you're going to talk with me. Okay? And you might even have to set up a timer in front of your kid because the kid's just going to go bonkers. But if you over time learn to slow down your child and force him or her to talk to you, you're going to build a relationship so that later on when that child becomes an adult, you're going to form lasting relationships.
And an attention span.
Oh, totally. Do you realize that it has taken me, at some points, 5 to 6 years of intermittent research to find the single item of proof that I've always been looking for that puts me on a solid foundation to speak about certain aspects of the New World Order? I've spent 5 or 6 years trying to find this or that document, and it's hard. It is like I will work on it for about 4 to 5 hours straight. And in the back of my mind, I realize, well, I'm not going to getting anything done tonight. I'll, come back at it later. And then 5 or 6 years later, I finally have the document. And that is its own reward.
Perseverance.
Absolutely. So when the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, get their act together and start developing their own currency index, which I suspect they will have to announce in 2 years or less, that is the formal death knell to the US dollar, because America cannot take on Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's impossible. But having said that, there is one thing that greatly concerns me, and that is that a war will be used as the cover for the economic collapse that is coming.
That's genius.
Oh, absolutely. I would agree with that.
Because if you're trying to control people, you can never ever get the people to put their attention on you as the source of the problem. You must have some kind of external source of the problem and lead your captive people to offer the solution to that problem. You can never be the problem. You need to be the solution.
And as you're talking about all these countries and these currencies, I stumbled upon something recently. I think it was Eustace Mullins' protege who had said this, and I don't know what you think about Eustace Mullins. That's another topic in itself. I'm sure a lot of people distance themselves from him due to what a lot of people have said about him. But I was just kind of asking for verification here. I guess I'm getting a little bit ahead, but it's kind of on the same page here. But as far as central banks go, my understanding is that every country, with the exception of 3 countries, have a Rothschild central bank. I don't know if that's true, but what I had heard was that it was Iran, North Korea, and Cuba that did not.
That is correct.
So, and Libya, as we were speaking of before, was 4th on that list.
That is also correct. And as Gaddafi was still alive, the first thing the so-called rebels did was establish a central bank. This was apparently priority number 1 in Libya. And of course, that central bank took the tons of gold that Gaddafi was storing on behalf of the people of Libya and conveniently shipped them off to Switzerland.
Wow. I mean, I'm saying wow, but I'm not surprised. It's like one of those wows, like depressing.
That's right. Now, here is how criminal the whole situation is. And it's part of a 100-year plan. And we are seeing the thick edge of the wedge now, but it has always been a wedge for 100 years. The Federal Reserve, as we know, was established in 1913, thanks to, bought out politicians and Nelson Aldrich, who just happened to be married into the Rockefeller family. And the Income Tax Act was also passed in conjunction with the Federal Reserve Act. Because if the currency, and only gold and silver are money, everything else is currency, okay? So when I use the word money, I'm talking about gold and silver. When I use the word currency, I'm talking about
fiat currency.
Yeah, that's right. I'm talking about digital dollars or fancy pieces of toilet paper that we all have to work for. Okay, so the income tax was phased in slowly and very insidiously. The Income Tax Act was only popular, I hate to use that word, but popular from around World War II on as an excuse to pay for the war. So the bankers always profit from war. War is the best form of economic activity if you are a banker, because you fund side A and make all kinds of money on overpriced guns and ammo. You fund side B doing the same thing. And then it actually doesn't matter what side wins, because now you have an excuse to reconstruct both sides of the war. And the real prize, the economic prize of a war, isn't really about ammo. It's about the long-term debt that the conflict generates. For example, it took approximately 85 years for Germany to pay off its debt for World War I. 85 years. And you make money funding both sides. So you got an initial huge return on your investment, and you got a long-term source of income. It's beautiful.
So big time down payment with steady mortgage payments.
You got it. And if a couple million people have to die, well, then that's too bad, because, the world is overrun with useless eaters. And as far as we're concerned, we want all the planet's resources for ourselves. So if about 6.5 billion people have to die, well, then that's good, because we are on top. The rest of the people are just dumb, stupid animals. And look at us, we're godlike people because we are so much smarter.
You know what's sad is what you just said is exactly how it is, though.
Well, you know what? What's really sad is that I can back up what I'm saying with proof carved in stone, literally. If you drive in the middle of nowhere in Alberton County, Georgia, you will see the Georgia Guidestones. And the Georgia Guidestones are written in 6 different languages, if I'm not mistaken, and some of which are dead languages. We're talking about Babylonian cuneiform. Like, who writes or reads in Babylonian cuneiform these days? But there's a reason for it. Because if you really want to understand the New World Order, you have to first understand God's plan throughout history, the Judeo-Christian traditions. Because the New World Order follows that tradition and perverts it. The New World Order's plans follow biblical plans, except to the 180.0 polar opposite degree. So the writings and the goals of the New World Order are written in the form of the 10 Commandments on the Georgia Guidestones, which are laid out in astronomical and astrotheological order.
Mm-hmm.
You have to literally decode it on several levels.
Now, in relation to those Georgia Guidestones, I guess the biggest thing on those stones that sticks out to me in my memory is the keeping the population at a certain level. And
yeah, about 500 million. So about 6.5 billion people have to go.
Right. And the thing that trips me out, Leonard, is that even my friends from Illinois, where I used to live, I mean, if I was to talk to them, they'd be like, well, this world is just so overpopulated, I can't imagine bringing a kid in. You know, or I'm all for gay rights, for instance, because, you know, they're actually helping, you know, the population control. And they're saying these things, and regardless of anyone who's listening's view on these things, there's kind of something inherently wrong with that mindset.
Well, I referenced in my first film a page of the document "Man at the Turning Point," written by the Club of Rome, and it states for all the world to see how that humanity will become the enemy of man, because we will hype up man's impact on the environment. Now, man definitely does have an impact on the environment, but all Western countries' populations are dying. The only way those populations are maintained or increased is through immigration. And all these quote-unquote third world countries are having 6 to 8 kids because they are under the economic thumb of the New World Order system. If they were allowed to develop like the Western nations, they wouldn't have 6 to 8 kids. So the economic system, the military system, is to blame. It's not a matter of man being the enemy. It's the New World Order system being the enemy.
I think what's most amazing about the lie that this world is overpopulated is, I want to say it was Kent Hovind who said this. I heard it from him, but I may be wrong. You could fit everyone who is alive in the world today into, is it Tallahassee, Florida, and everyone would have like 2 to 3 feet on each side of them. Like if you were to stuff them all in there.
He's accurate in that layout. It is amazing how the Rothschilds, for example, have over 24 castles, paid for generally by the taxpayer because these are, you know, quote unquote historical landmarks. The Rothschilds own no, I'm serious.
Oh no, we believe you.
The Rothschilds own entire islands in Greece. Literally, you have to look them up on Google Earth. And it's amazing what they have. The Bush family owns several thousand acres in the middle of the Brazilian forest because they know when it all goes down, they want to be as far away from America as possible on their own little isolated jungle aquifer-laden land with a military base right beside it.
That's interesting that you say that about the Rothschilds owning islands, because we have this illusion that we own things, you know?
No, you don't. You're a tenant.
Right,
Yeah.
right. We can hold land, but we don't own land. Right. It's kind of amazing, actually, you know, because, I mean, even sorry, go ahead, Daniel. No, but somebody actually pointed that out to me this winter after I had seen your film, and I was making a comment like, you know, I would like to, own a house at some point, but I don't know that it'll work out in my favor economically at this point to actually take on an official mortgage. And he said, you don't own anything. If you don't pay your taxes, that's not yours. And it's kind of amazing, like, when you think about it that way. I mean, it's very simple, and then people get all huffy and puffy about the whole tax issue, but it's really interesting because you don't own anything, and we think we do.
Well, back to the income tax issue. In 1982, President Reagan initiated the Snow Commission. And I searched for about 2 to 3 years to try to finally get the proof at this point, and I have it. After about almost 2 years of study on just the income tax issue, the Snow Commission concluded that 1/3 of all income tax gets wasted to the underground economy to avoid income tax in the first place, and 1/3 of the income tax gets taken up by government bureaucracy, and the remaining third of all income tax revenue goes towards paying the interest on the national debt. Not, and this is a quote, not one dime goes towards infrastructure or social programs. Not one dime.
That's shocking.
That's right.
You know what I find shocking? I'll go ahead, Leonard. Sorry.
Okay. And this goes back to the gold standard. People ask me, you know what really, really bothers me? And this is a sore point. People have emailed me on my Gold and Silver 101 video over and over again. I've even deleted half of the comments that say something like, oh, when the tribulation comes, they will cast their gold and silver in the streets. And I'm going, yeah, but have you read the second half of that verse?
Oh, I know.
Yeah. Right? In the day of the Lord. Okay? And so between now and then, since you're so smart, since you can tell me when the day of the Lord is, so, between now and then, we should just sit beside our computer and say, woe is me, and do nothing, right? We should do the exact opposite of what the scripture says, which says, occupy until I come. So, in other words, people have accused me of trying to be materialistic, and I'm saying, no. It's not about that. The current financial system is satanic. It's drowning you in debt. It's killing you. God made gold and silver. Man made Federal Reserve notes. Why would I want to be part of a satanic system? And then they preach to me about, they'll cast their gold and silver in the streets. It's like, I actually have to tell people that they're in danger of being self-righteous because they quote one half of the verse out of context as an excuse to do nothing. And it really, really bothers me. They're so trapped in the current fiat monetary system that they actually quote scripture out of context to justify them doing nothing. And it really bothers me.
That reminds me so much of hearing people constantly misuse render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and never, ever putting in the second part of that verse, which is render unto God what is God's.
That's right. And what is Caesar's and what is God's? Well,
you just said it.
Yeah, exactly. You are God's property, and your material possessions are Caesar's property. And by the way, the first century Christians were crucified, were literally coated with pitch, and hung up on the walls and burned alive as torches for Caesar's evening garden parties. They were hacked and every death that you can possibly imagine because they wouldn't worship Caesar. So that kind of blows away Romans 13, do whatever the government says. That's not true, okay? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. And when push comes to shove, we must obey God rather than man.
Absolutely.
I've never tried to incite a revolution of arms up against the government. I'm about a revolution of the human mind and the human heart towards God to get our priorities straight, because our priorities as Christians and non-Christians are totally messed up.
And using our free will.
Oh, yeah, while we still have it.
Leonard, if I could just pause here real quick. We're talking about, believers and Christians being deceived. One thing that weighs heavy on my heart is my sister Hannah. My parents have actually listened to me when I showed them your film. That it's gotten them thinking, but she absolutely refuses to hear any of this, and it absolutely breaks my heart because she doesn't understand what she's a part of. And I've heard you on your other interviews talk about how with your own church, they don't like to listen to you, and I just like to know how do you cope with that? I mean, that's kind of a broad question.
Yeah, are there people near and dear to you, very close to you, that you feel that same way about?
Yes. And it's not easy. One of the excuses that people have brought up over and over and over again is what I call the weakest aspect of my argument in favor of an alternative explanation to 9/11. And the weakest aspect of my argument so far has been my explanation of the unusual phone calls of 9/11 between the planes and people's loved ones. And they will hold on to my apparent lack of an explanation as an excuse to completely avoid all the ironclad, strong arguments that I have for the alternative explanation for 9/11. For example, Building 7, not hit by a plane, not splashed by burning jet fuel, and yet it collapses into the point of greatest resistance, which is in on itself.
That was the whole reason that brought me into even believing the entire 9/11 inside job thing was Building 7, because you just can't that's such a loose end,
Right. When I cut a tree down, it falls to the side.
Mm-hmm.
It does not, never has, nor ever will telescope down into its own trunk and explode in a pile of sawdust.
Physics.
Right. Of the billions of trees which have been cut down for thousands of years, not one has ever collapsed like it did on 9/11. And if I hit a tree with a bazooka and light it on fire at any point in that tree, it will catch on fire and it will fall to the side. It will never collapse down into its own trunk and explode in a pile of sawdust.
And the lack of coverage on Building 7,
Well, this gets into another whole issue, which is media control, and
right. And we shouldn't shift, I guess, into that since we're on the whole.
Yeah, I could talk for 2 hours on that subject. But back into the subject at hand, which is how do you deal with denial from your own family, friends, and church? I have to rely on Scripture. That's my bottom line. So I say, well, look, if heaven itself was not immune from a conspiracy on the part of Lucifer and 1/3 of the angels to do something which is totally insane, which is rebel against God, how on earth do you think anything on earth is different?
Absolutely.
Right.
I think that's a very good point.
Right. And the only time Jesus got physically violent was in the temple. The one place where man should have communion with God, the priest class was busy running a multi-level financial extortion racket, where if you're a God-fearing Jew, you pay for your sacrifice with the temple coin, which is an issue because you only have Roman coins. So now you're paying huge exorbitant exchange rates. And then you have to get gouged for your approved, quote unquote, sacrifice, which is about 2 to 3 times what another another animal down the road is worth. Same animal, right? Mm-hmm. No different. And then, of course, you've journeyed on your way to the temple. And it doesn't take much of an imagination to realize, you know what, the priest class over a couple decades would have had so much money that they would have bought up all the hotels around the major routes and would have gouged the traveling pilgrims on their way to the temple to be gouged again.
Sounds like not much has changed.
Nothing has changed. And people get really upset at me when I suggest that there are a certain class amongst Jews today that have no problem extorting and killing their own tribe, just as they had no problem extorting and killing their own tribe back in Jesus' day.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And they look at me and they say, anti-Semitic. And I'm going, well, you obviously haven't read what Jesus said to the priest class, because if you did, you would have read phrases like spawn of Satan and brood of vipers.
Right.
Real quick before, thank you for your answer. I'll use that in my discussions with my sister. Before Sam gets back on track with what he's got to talk about, I want to ask, with the whole Syria situation, what's going on with Israel? I hear nothing about them. I know they're behind the scenes, but what do you think is going to be their mix-up in all of this?
I'll tell you one thing.
Okay.
Israel controls the United States.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Israel is the neck upon which the head of the United States turns. Okay? The United States cares for Israel, but Israel cares for Israel.
Right.
Don't forget that. I do not understand how dual citizens of Israel and the United States are even allowed to hold cabinet positions in the United States. I do not understand that. But if you dare mention that, then of course you are anti-Semitic.
Yep.
Okay?
It's the one term, you know?
Yeah. And, oh, by the way, the Zionists, and I carefully define Zionism in my film. I spend about 5 minutes defining Zionism because I don't want to be vague on that topic.
Yes. It's amazing, though, how many people don't know the difference between Zionism and Judaism. They think they're the same thing. I mean, I bring that up in talking with pastors, guys I went to school with, that I went to school to become a pastor with, and they're like, dude, no, God said that he would bless his people Israel. I'm not talking about the Jews, I'm talking about a political movement, and they just don't get it.
And actually, Leonard, our pastor at our church actually put this. I really appreciated the way that he put this when he did talk in reference to the Jews, because the Jews are, God's chosen people. But where the problem kind of stands is that it's not the people that are special, but what they were chosen to do.
Yes. Here's the truly remarkable fact. I always preface any of my remarks on Israel by saying, yes, the Jews are God's chosen people, and yes, at times the leadership of Israel and even Israel itself got caught up in nothing less than Satanism. And at that point, or points within Israel's history, God had to use the enemies of Israel to conquer Israel, to break the back of Israel's involvement in the occult, because there was no other way. And I find it truly remarkable that that which is opposed to God within Israel today is fulfilling biblical prophecy, because there would have been no Israel had it not been for the Holocaust. And there wouldn't have been a Holocaust if it wasn't for the Zionists who openly cooperated with the Nazi movement, knowing that this would create sympathy for the Jews to get their homeland in the middle of the Muslim world. It's impossibly dark, but it was the only way that the modern recreation of Israel could ever have occurred.
It had to be an emotional attachment, so people could actually jump on the wagon.
Absolutely. And by the way, the Holocaust was just a preview of what is to come, because Israel's army is going to become exceedingly great. And Israel is going to literally enrage the world so much that it is going to be surrounded by the Ezekiel 37, 38, 39, final war against Israel. And it's my belief, and you can disagree if you want, that's fine, because none of us sees eschatological facts 2020, that the day of the Lord, in other words, the rapture and God's protecting of Israel, I believe are the one and same event. In other words, a great violent shaking of the earth where the dead in Christ rise, the rapture occurs, and of course the enemies of Israel pretty well killed off. All the same event.
Wow, Leonard, you're talking about the dry bones in Ezekiel, the dead in Christ rising, right? Ezekiel 37?
Yes, but in that context of Ezekiel 37, that is a reference to the state of Israel's faith as Israel becomes a political reality. And today, the vast majority of Israelites are secular. They don't even have any religion. All they care about is their tribe. And I find it fascinating how this is a very complex topic, but I will dare to unpack it. The vast majority of Jews today in Israel are white, and yet their Semitic brethren, the Palestinians, are brown. And if you go down that road, well, hey, I just referenced Jacob and Esau, and I'm saying, look, in the diaspora of AD 70, the Jews were scattered all over the place, and a lot of them, for about 800 years, became European, and then got pushed down from Germany, from mainly Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia and Russia. And so you have a people that is generally European and obviously Jewish background in the middle of a brown-skinned Muslim world. And the layer upon layer of irony in that statement is remarkable.
Yeah, and real quick, while we're on that subject, I find it interesting. Daniel and I have discussed this, and in the Bible, I believe that in the Jewish, I guess, how do I say it, lineage or whatever, how a Jew is born to another Jew, it was through the male, and it is kind of changed into, if your mother's Jewish, then you're Jewish.
That's right. And
where did that change?
Oh, Jewish traditions have changed over and over and over again. I can't really answer that question, but I will say this. Matthew 24 is of key importance to me, because Matthew 24 basically has Jesus reinforcing deceit, deceivers, and deception 4 times. He doesn't mention it once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. And that's what the whole end time scenario, we are headed in, is based on. And Jesus talked about in Matthew 24, nation rising up against nation. And the Greek word for nation in that passage is ethnos. Mm-hmm. So man has always been racist. We know that. But now in the 21st century, we have access to technologies which Hitler would have dreamed about. I am talking about the ability to isolate genetic heritages and specifically knock certain genotypes out and leaving people with certain genotypes alive by exploding a biological warfare bomb in a defined area. We have that technology. And I truly do believe that it might be Israel who uses that in quote-unquote self-defense. Because the Bible says Israel's army will be exceedingly great. It says that ethnic group will rise up against ethnic group. And what do we see? We see European Jews surrounded by Semitic or Shemitic brown-skinned Muslims. I mean, if you think the anger towards Israel is bad now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
I was kind of hoping you were going to go there real quickly. I was going through your interviews with Peter Herbert recently, and you briefly talked about Israel's expanding borders and how that might be what enrages the world.
Well, that's part of the whole situation. Israel loves what is happening in Syria right now, because that'll be an excuse to assume more territory in the interest of international security.
Right, and they would also by that assume, you mentioned earlier, the water rights to that natural gas.
Oh, totally. And of course, the average Christian says, oh, glory be to God, Israel's assuming its international or ancient borders. And I'm going, yeah, they are, but this is being done by a peaceful process here. And I say, you know what? The Jews are God's chosen people, but I'm going to make a general statement. And the problem with general statements is that they contain many exceptions, but I use them because they're generally accurate. And the general statement is this: most Jews today have gone over a period of thousands of years from faith in God to faith in the law to faith in themselves. And that explains so much of what is happening in Israel today. I ask the average individual, do you know that it is illegal to openly witness for Christ in Israel?
Yes.
That's right. It is illegal for a Christian to marry a Jew in Israel. They will not recognize your marriage.
But the only thing we'll hear about is the Muslim nations who don't allow it.
Oh, totally. And have you ever heard of Israel's assault on Palestine with white phosphorus gas?
I'm not sure. I want to say that sounds familiar, but I know little to nothing about it.
Well, I've got about 24 photos of that. High res. Verified. And I've got the video to back that up. See, this is how hypocritical things are. The forces which control America's army, and I'm careful not to use the word America because I don't want to sully, tar and feather America. That's not my gig.
Well, we can just say USA Corporation. It's more accurate.
Amen, brother, because that's what's going on. Okay, because oh boy, right there, that's about 5,000 years of history in 5 seconds. We've gone from monarchical power to merchant power to corporate power,
right,
backed up with military power. That is the new 21st century paradigm. So the United States in Vietnam, to protect the drug trade and to have another phony war for the military-industrial complex, had no problem spraying Agent Orange, but Syria, which hasn't done anything yet, is instantly targeted, right?
Okay, so I mean, we hear about now, Sam and I, in the news, or through the grapevine, Syrian biological attack. We just assume false flag in a situation like that. Is that definitely what you're seeing then?
Well, if the standard of proof that John Skull and Bones Kerry uses is YouTube clips, then I guess we're on a level playing field.
And all they do is continuously play the same clips every day for a week or 2 weeks, as long as this, surfaces onto the news, and then it goes away somehow, and then months later, like 3 or 4 months, 5 months down the line, it comes up and it's a much bigger deal, or a much less big deal, but they're taking care of it.
And isn't it interesting how all this is happening right around the now 12th anniversary of September 11th?
I'm glad you picked up on that, because I'll tell you what, we need to have constant psychological propaganda thrown at us, even subconsciously, because people remember what happened on September 11th, obviously. I mean, who could forget that? The same clips of the same planes hitting the towers over and over and over and over and over again. So people are literally biologically programmed now over the past 12 years, chronologically programmed to be subconsciously patriotic. And that subconscious patriotism is reinforced by the external need for the security of not just America, quote unquote, but the entire free world, in the interest of spreading, quote unquote, democracy.
Yep. One more thing that I think is interesting with Barack Obama posturing for war. I think it was in your film, I think it was you that said, there's no difference, or maybe it was in one of your interviews now, when you understand the history of the president, there's no difference between Barack Obama and George W. Bush. They're the same person, basically.
Well, the specific saying that I used is that Obama has out-Bushed Bush.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
And it's so true. And, I love the fact that these Hollywood anti-war liberals who were so vocal during the Bush administration are dead silent now. They've been silent for 5 years, right?
Yep.
So that just lets you know how much of a within the political paradigm they are.
Well, and now what's hilarious is you have Senator John McCain, the Republican candidate who was supposed to follow Bush, is now crying, "No war, no war." The conservatives are now crying, "No war." It's all a game.
Well, actually, I would have to disagree that McCain is against the war. He's all in favor of the war. I mean, the so-called opposition is actually in favor of a war that is not backed by any proof. This is insane. And I love the video video after video of people in John McCain's constituency confronting McCain. Literally, they're now starting to talk treason, and they're citing the United States Code, which is perfectly accurate in McCain's case, because there are photographs which McCain referenced of McCain meeting with Al-Qaeda rebels, and one of the rebels in the background to one of those photographs was the guy who was videotaped knowingly cutting open the heart and liver of one of his victims and eating it.
Wow.
This is the guy that McCain hung around with in Syria. I can't write this up. This is insane.
Wow. Okay. Well, let Sam get back to his questions.
I'm loving this, but I would really like to go back to the central banks now, Leonard.
Okay.
Just because I think that most of the, at least my consensus is that most of the people in my church and most of the people that I know don't really understand central banks, and they don't understand how they operate, let alone what they're all a part of and how long they've been apart. And just like you said earlier, you said in 1913, with, I believe you said the income tax was
That's
fully
right.
being implemented with the Federal Reserve. This is really great because, honestly, Leonard, the reason why my mind completely opened up to the New World Order was through the Federal Reserve initially, because I had no clue, and I was just studying it, and I was like, man, it seems like things aren't going the right way. The Republicans lost all this stuff, and so I started to look into. It's weird how God kind of works into situations that you don't expect, but I was in church, okay, and my pastor said something in reference to the Rockefellers. And it was a story that didn't even really have anything to do with the Rockefellers other than using their name, because it was about somebody who was basically name dropping and saying that he was a Rockefeller, and he used it in context with some sort of message, and I don't remember the message, unfortunately. But that one part that I did get out of it at the time was the Rockefellers. I'm like, I don't really know much about the Rockefellers. And 2 weeks later, as I was starting to study, what has gone wrong with America since its formation? Like what has changed in our Constitution, what has changed in our policies and our codes that has made it so far from what it started as, because something's not right. And when I came across a series of things, I came across the Federal Reserve. And I, unfortunately, Leonard, went to public school and wasn't taught about the Federal Reserve, that it is in fact a privately owned bank that is not part of our government. And in studying that and watching different videos, reading up on it, I came across your documentary because of that. Because there's still, I believe, on YouTube, there's a link to your documentary. I think it's maybe one of the older versions, but it has the page with J.P. Morgan, J.D. Rockefeller, the Schiffs, and the Warburgs. That five-man picture, and that's what actually led me into this whole thing and got me into your film, and then opened up the door for a world of difference, I guess.
Well, that's good that you have a good grasp on the history of it. So let me give you a 2-minute crash course on the income tax and Federal Reserve. First off, the Federal Reserve is not federal, and it is not a reserve. All it does is act as a front for America's big banks. That's it. So when you get a US dollar, you actually are spending an IOU note. And that note is on loan to the United States government at interest. Now, keep in mind that this is how insidious the whole thing is. The only way to pay the interest on the debt, which was printed up out of thin air, okay, it's like monopoly money, or me writing ones and zeros on pieces of paper and then handing them to you, okay? The only way to pay the interest on the debt is by printing new money, which also has interest attached to it. So that is the cancer that is part of the fiat currency system. And thousands of fiat currencies that are backed by nothing have failed. Not one has succeeded. In the colonial days of America, you actually had pine trees backing the local currency. It was literally called the pine tree shilling. And back then, that was a smart maneuver because you can use those pine trees to build your house, to build furniture, and to chop up and heat your home with it. It made sense. Why not pine trees, right? So back just before the Federal Reserve was created, the bankers said, there's no way the average member of the public is going to go for this, as in a private bank controlling the currency issuance of the United States, unless we engineer financial panics for a couple of years and then put out the idea in the controlled papers that a central bank would be a good idea that is privately run. Okay? And then the bankers had even reverse psychological propaganda behind their propaganda by saying that they weren't in favor of a private central bank, when, of course, they were the ones behind the whole thing to begin with. And it is very, very important to understand that these bankers were in competition with each other. And they agreed to put aside their competition and cooperate because, like the game of Monopoly, everybody starts with the same amount of resources, and the game is over when one person has a monopoly. And that can take a long time, or it can take a short time. It can take a long time if you are the most prosperous nation of the world, and say the entire continent of Europe is busy killing themselves over and over again in World War I and World War II, and is busy buying your resources from you, and is generally untouched by World War I and World War II, so the game can go on for generations. But in the end, the currency that you and I use is an illusion. It is printed up out of thin air, and it is loaned to the governments of the world at interest. This is unconstitutional. It is immoral. It is an unjust scale. And the bankers love their debt and death paradigm. And this is becoming increasingly obvious right now.
You hit the nail on the head, and the part that I think, again, you're talking about the currency, in the colonial days being backed by, land or, earth, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And anyway, the thing that I think a lot of people, including myself, I think I have maybe a slight grasp on it, but is how the bank operates on the fractional reserve lending and the quantitative easing.
Okay. When you sign up for a loan or a line of credit or a mortgage, the bank never fronts your creditor, the person who owns the house that you want to buy, any of its own money. It fronts the creditor other people's money. And that goes back for centuries based on what you said, the fractional reserve system. The goldsmiths of Europe were the world's first bankers. This goes back about, since even before the Knights Templars. This goes back about 1,500 years. And back then, the goldsmiths had a vault, and they said, well, we'll store your gold and silver for you in our vault for a fee. No problem. And over time, the goldsmiths realized that, you know what? People generally keep their valuables in our bank. And what they did was hand out claim checks for people's property. They were notes written on fancy pieces of paper that other people couldn't counterfeit. In other words, the piece of paper that people walked around with was the claim check for the real wealth, which was held in their vaults. When you buy a car, a new car from a dealership, you sign a contract and you pay good money for that contract. But the contract isn't the car. The contract says you will get the car when it's ready. But the contract isn't what is valuable. The car is what is valuable. And over time, we have gone from the 1880s classical gold standard, which was you put in $20 of currency into a bank and you get a $20 gold piece, to World War I, which was the perfect excuse for the bankers to devalue the gold standard so that you put down $50 of currency and you now get a $20 gold piece between the interwar period of World War I and World War II to Bretton Woods of 1945, where now the US dollar was the world's reserve currency and it was pegged to gold at the ratio of $35 an ounce to, in 1971, being on a fiat standard of nothing at all. In other words, oil is now what is propping up the US dollar. And of course, we just started our conversation this night by saying that that standard is being challenged now by not just the Middle East, but by major nations like Brazil, China, etc.
Now, real quick, I don't want to get too off the topic here, but when you say that, and we talk about these central banks, okay, now you're throwing out countries now that actually do have central banks that are challenging it. How does that work if it's all connected to the Rothschild central bank?
Aha. Every empire rises and falls. The Rothschilds are above every empire, whether it was the French Empire or the Russian Empire or the English Empire, or dare I say it, even the American Empire. And back in the early 1900s, the Rothschilds realized that the British Empire was fading and the American Empire was growing. The Rothschilds and the bankers associated with them now realize that the American Empire is fading and the Chinese Empire is rising. That is why in the 1970s, when Nixon first opened up China to international trade, the Rothschilds were there like a hand in glove, handing out oodles of cash to kickstart the juggernaut that is the Chinese economy right now, knowing that 30, 40, 50 years down the road, China would be the absolute boss. But in essence, China would still be controlled because China has a central bank which is interlinked with the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. And the International Monetary Fund is the central banker's central bank. And you're going to see when the American dollar crashes sometime very soon, you're going to see a proposal that China will not like. And that proposal is that the IMF will index every nation's currency to a basket of currencies. In other words, the IMF will determine what the value of your currency is based on its determination of your economic performance. In other words, America won't be in charge of its own currency anymore, and the IMF will be in charge of its currency, because now you have a point of control within each nation. Each nation has its own central bank, which is in turn controlled on a global level by the central banker's central bank, which is the IMF.
So, in accordance with what you're saying, as we talked about Syria, for instance, who does have a central bank, yet they have a pact with Iran. How does that work? Is Iran already infiltrated, basically, to some degree, where they have that pact, knowingly being friends with Syria, having that central bank, and them not having the central bank? I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but why would they want to have a pact with somebody if they wanted to keep their sovereignty in that regard?
Okay, I need to back up a little bit because I obviously didn't explain myself fully. There's a little bit of a gray area here. Each nation has to have a central bank.
Yes.
The United States wouldn't function very well economically if each state had its own currency.
Yes.
Okay, you need a national currency. The only question is, who controls that central bank?
Mm-hmm.
The central bank of Libya was fine under Gaddafi. It was taken over by the quote-unquote rebels, who instantly stripped it of all its gold and sent it off to Switzerland. Well, the same kind of takeover maneuver is being attempted with Syria and Iran.
Okay, so basically these nations have like their own privatized central bank. It's not part of the IMF, and now they're being forced to be grafted into that system.
There's only about a few dozen countries which aren't part of the IMF, and most of those few dozen countries are of no economic importance, and the ones that are of course harboring weapons of mass destruction, and are going to carry out the memory of Osama bin Laden at any moment.
On May 1st, of course.
Oh, totally. You know, it was so funny. That was the night that I lost about $24,000 worth of value of my silver holdings.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, the so-called May 1st smash. I mean, what a beautiful way to, in an occult way, celebrate history with the, of course, the anniversary of the founding of the Illuminati on May 1st, with the alleged death of Osama bin Laden, who was shot, in the left eye of Horus.
Yeah.
And then, of course, was paraded across, in terms of photographs, on all the front papers of the world, the newspapers of the world. But then people realized, you know what? I've seen this body before, this Osama bin Laden character before. And it turns out that if you watch Black Hawk Down and you invert a scene from left to right to left, one of the dead bodies is the image of what they tried to pass off as Osama bin Laden. And researchers like me noticed this. And of course, the dead image of Osama bin Laden was obviously doctored by conspiracy theorists.
Of course.
Yes, because people like us noticed that this is such an obviously Photoshopped job that we can't believe it, because look, we can superimpose the image of Osama on this dead body if we invert the frame in the movie Black Hawk Down.
I don't remember where I'd heard that, but I'd heard that somewhere before.
Yeah.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah, and also other so-called pictures of Osama were photoshopped using the image of a Spanish politician who attempted to sue American newspapers because his reputation was being tarnished. You know, he looked an awful lot like Osama, right? And apparently, Osama bin Laden, suffering from Marfan's disease, which is related to kidney failure, can hop from cave to cave in Afghanistan, connected to a dialysis machine, and be housed for years in the only 2-story building in the entire city of a military base in Afghanistan, less than a quarter mile from that American military base, and no one would bother to check that only 2-story building until years later.
I think the most smack to my face about the alleged killing of Osama bin Laden was, you dumped his body in the ocean. Because clearly the Muslims have done that for thousands of years.
Oh, yeah, it's because they love to carry the rotting corpses of their loved ones behind camels for hundreds of miles in the 120-degree desert heat in order to dump their bodies in the ocean. Yeah, that's right. I heard that was Islamic tradition for centuries.
Real quick, Leonard, to get back onto the monetary real quick, so we're a debt-based system, as you've said. We're an IOU system. And I've been trying to figure this out. I'm assuming, I've listened to your interviews, and you've said how you're going to start your next film with the verse about money. What do you think Jesus says about usury and about being in a debt-based system? What do you think Jesus would think about that?
Great question, because I hear a lot of negative talk in regards to interest.
And how does this apply to the Christians that own businesses and continuously take out loans for their businesses?
Very good questions. Okay. Jesus is in favor of interest because one of his parables was the rich ruler who had a couple of servants, and each was given a certain amount to invest. And of course, we all know the story, and the story ends with the master condemning the one servant who hid his investment under the quote-unquote threat of the evil taskmaster. And the evil taskmaster, speaking through Jesus, or Jesus was talking about the taskmaster, said, "Why didn't you at least put this in the bank where you could have earned what? Interest, right. So obviously Jesus is not going to recommend that which is immoral. So we have to redefine what usury or interest is. Usury is an onerous burden. Interest is fair, because what you are doing when you take on a loan, nobody's putting a gun to your head, is you're saying, pay me what I haven't earned yet. Okay?
Okay.
So now you are agreeing to pay more than the money that is fronted to you because you haven't earned it yet. So everyone's crying, oh, interest is unfair. And I'm going, no, it's totally fair because you haven't earned it yet. So if you don't like it, don't get a loan.
And that kind of puts a damper on Peter Joseph in the second Zeitgeist film there, huh?
Well, don't get me started on Peter Joseph.
I would
because
love to get
I
you
can
started
rip him
on
to
that.
shreds when he references Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and
Oh, man.
all kinds of occultists.
Oh.
I'm going, now I know where you're getting your info from, you know?
Yep.
And of course, his series of films goes increasingly away from the quote-unquote conspiratorial mindset, to use that pejorative and generally twisted term, to how beautiful life would be if we were all controlled by a huge mainframe computer. And efficiencies, efficiencies are the new religion.
And who controls that?
Exactly.
Who
Do you want
controls it,
Adolf
Peter?
Hitler? Do you want Adolf Hitler behind a supercomputer?
I don't think I need to even say anything. I don't agree with that.
Right. And that is what is eventually going to happen. And I could go on for about 2 hours on the one topic of after 7 years of research, I finally understand what the mark of the beast is. Mm-hmm. But that is a whole other huge can of worms.
Yeah.
Okay, so at another time we'll open that with you.
And real quick, I mean, to add on to the Zeitgeist thing, it's all about victimizing us as in society. It's not taking personal responsibility for anything.
Oh, yeah. And who determines what is right and wrong?
Oh, yeah. Well, nobody does.
Right. It's all culturally defined. So now what somebody in power says is right and wrong becomes the law of the land. And it is quite obvious that Peter Joseph is one arrogant dude.
Oh, yeah.
And he views Christianity with such disdain that it just comes through. You can see it in the discussions that he's had after his film has been shown.
Mm-hmm. So sorry I brought you back onto that topic.
No problem.
So we were talking about usury, and we were trying to define interest and Jesus's perspective, and kind of getting back to I guess that.
Okay. Jesus said it so perfectly when he said, "There should be no one poor among you," and he also said something which you might think contradicts his first statement, but it actually doesn't. The poor you will always have among you. In other words, there should be no one poor among you, but there will always be poor among you. In other words, circumstances happen. You'll get fires, floods, whatever, okay? You will always have the unexpected. That means you will have systems of credit. Even if you don't have currency, you can agree to use or output your labor at a certain rate over a certain period of time. You don't even need currency in that case. So biblical capitalism, especially among the Israelites, is fascinating to me because every 49th, or technically the 50th year, you'd have the year of Jubilee. And every 7 years, you have what is known as the Shemitah, which means the release, where all debts were canceled. Now, that is a fascinating and wonderful concept because A, if you're someone who is rich, you get to keep your profits. B, in the 6.5 year of a 7-year cycle, if you come up to me and say, I need $100,000 mortgage, I'm going to go, no chance, buddy, because the Shemitah is coming along and I'm going to lose $100,000, right? And so what that does is it limits indebtedness. In other words, you have to have indebtedness. It takes money to make money, but you don't want to go crazy over it. And it never compounds more than 7 years. And this is a beautiful system, which of course God set up among the Israelites. And then of course the priest class totally violated with all kinds of rules and regulations and rituals to try to get around that. And of course it's very a moot point to discuss that now because it'll never be practiced. But the principles that we can learn from the Shemitah, from the release, are there. And so what that teaches me as a Bible-believing Christian is that debt is necessary, but don't be ruled by it. It's better to be humble than have all these trappings with our second and third mortgages and a car loan and a vacation loan and a student loan than it is to, just live humbly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of agree with that.
Because the Bible says the borrower is what to the lender?
A slave to the lender.
Slave, that's right. And the Israelites were initially not supposed to have a king. But like little children, they said, we want a king. We want a king. And God said, okay, you're going to get a king, but you won't like him because he will what? He will drag you off to war and make you his slaves. And nothing has changed in thousands of years.
Every time I hear that phrase, it just comes back to me what Solomon said, what has been will be again, what has been done will be done again.
You got it. It's like Babylon is in front of us, but isn't there yet. It's the already, but not yet.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you I'm going to try to make this a quick one, but in talking, you've done so many interviews, and everybody, it's such a hot topic, 9/11, since it's so recent, and, such an insane circumstance. But with the World Trade Center, I know that I've heard this, and I just kind of wanted to confirm with you, but that the Twin Towers, there were records kept there, and they were destroyed, and I guess in accordance with the switching of office from Bill Clinton to George W. Bush, that something happened where there was a big surplus with Clinton, where we came out of debt magically. And then I guess in conjunction with the Twin Towers going down, I guess what I've heard is that $40 trillion were wiped out of the national debt.
That is correct. I will question that figure, but the figure is quite large. And, excuse me, treasury bills were all piled up in Building 7. And I found out since the release of my first film that both, Marvin Bush and, what is his name? Not Herbert Walker.
No, I know you're talking about.
Wirt
D. Walker, yes.
Wirt D. Walker. So we're members of the board of Securicom Stratosec.
Mm-hmm.
which was providing the security for the World Trade Center complex of 7 buildings, not just 2.
Yep.
And that contract expired on September 10th, 2001. So you have a member of the Bush family on the maternal side and the paternal side in charge of security in the World Trade Center complex, whose contract ends one day before September 11th. But I guess that's just all coincidence.
Oh, of course.
Right. And there is an excellent series of interviews of a gentleman by the name of Richard Grove, who was supposed to attend a meeting of Marsh and McLennan, who was in charge of all those securities or had a major hand in those securities. And the maturity date for those securities was September 11th. And of course, those treasury papers were never reached a maturity date because they were all destroyed. And if people ask me, what is the primary motive for 9/11, I would have to say one word: money. Because let me just connect all the dots here. The war on terror, even if it ended today, is costing, and will cost the United States taxpayer, thanks to withdrawal costs, approximately $6 trillion.
Wow.
That's right. So just keep that one figure in your mind. Then add to that figure the several $trillion worth of securities that, of course, never reached a maturity date, housed in Building 7, which wasn't hit by a plane, wasn't hit by splashed by burning jet fuel. And then on the day before September 11th, September 10th, Donald Rumsfeld gets up in the Pentagon and says, "We can't account for $2.3 trillion of United States defense spending." And the plane that hits the Pentagon manages to hit the only section of the Pentagon under construction, being upgraded to make it impact resistant, and happens to hit the accounting division of the Pentagon, which is physically opposite of the command and control division of the Pentagon, where Donald Rumsfeld was. Now, you add $2.3 trillion to $6 trillion to $2 trillion, and you quickly, add things up here. And that's not all, because in the basement of one of the Twin Towers, Scotia Makata, which is one of 5 authorized gold dealing or bullion banks, had hundreds of millions of dollars of deliverable gold stored. And there was a truck that was busy stashing gold bars just before the towers collapsed, and there was a small trail of gold bars which dumped off this hastily loaded truck.
Leonard, it's so funny that you bring that up. I used to work with a guy who was a surveyor, and September 10th, 2001, they were somewhere near the World Trade Center, and I don't remember why, but he said there were like these armored trucks. There were tons of them underneath, just coming out from underneath it, like tons of them. Absolutely. So if people ask me, what's the bottom line, the motive for September 11th, and I say, well, you know what? Let's start with $12 trillion. Yeah.
And then there's the whole control aspect of it. And then there's the whole spiritual aspect of this. I mean, this gets really deep, and I'm not going to get into any detail about this topic tonight. I'll just bring it up. George W. Bush, in either his first or his second inauguration speech, made specific occultic references.
Yes, I'm familiar with this.
Angel in the Whirlwind, right?
Angel in the Whirlwind. That's right. Okay. And unless you are familiar with the occult, you will have no idea what he just said. And that is a reference to Metatron, which is a ancient Kabbalistic demonic entity, which is generally believed to be assigned territorially to Babylon. And we all know that the Tower of Babel, or Babel, was not about the height of the building.
Very true.
It was about the fact that it was some kind of structure and or device that was, as the Bible says, was able to reach into Shemayan, or the heavens, the spiritual realm. So now you have the Nephilim trying to interact with humanity on a mass scale after the flood. And the Bible says, there were giants in the land those days in Genesis 6. And also after that, that is a reference to the Tower of Babel. And what was the first thing that United States Special Forces and Rangers did in the War on Terror? They went for the ancient Babylonian artifacts. That's right. And don't think that there isn't some satanic drive to recreate the Tower of Babel using the knowledge that hopefully they were after. And don't think that that is the only attempt to break into the spiritual realm, because at the entrance to the CERN superconducting supercollider on the border of France and Switzerland is the goddess Shiva, which is the goddess of destroyer, the destroyer of worlds. And the logo for CERN is 666. And when Oppenheimer was interviewed shortly after the quote-unquote success of the nuclear bomb, he was asked, what was going through your mind when you saw the first nuclear explosion in Nevada? And he said, and I quote, I recall the line from the Bhagavad Gita where the prince is in front of Shiva in its multi-armed form and says, I am now become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Wow.
And this is what was going through his mind, Oppenheimer's mind. And don't think that the nuclear explosion that we saw in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and in Nevada was without its spiritual side, because that is the definition of alchemy, turning matter into energy. Einstein's equation proves that energy is matter, and therefore matter is energy. And the Kabbalists out there and the occultists out there want to turn matter into energy so that they can reach the next dimension.
Wow. Leonard, I watched recently a special. It was like a 4-hour special. I didn't watch all of it. I kind of skipped around because it was at nighttime and I was actually pretty tired, but about the pyramids and what those pyramids did. And something about energy, and it's just a theory, but does that make sense? Is this what you're kind of talking about with the energy levels around these pyramids and what the pyramids did?
Yes. And I'll tell you why. Remember what I said about 2 or 3 times already in this interview tonight. If you want to understand how the world of the occult works, you must first understand the Judeo-Christian traditions that God always follows in his dealings with man. Okay? The Bible says that God inhabits the praises of those who love him. Now, you tell me what that verse means. God inhabits the praises of those who love him. What does that mean? What spiritual principle is being taught
spiritual.
there?
He's in that.
You got it.
He dwells in it.
That's right. And now you bring in other verses to cross-reference your intuition. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, what?
Okay, that's what came to my mind. he is present, or God is there.
You got it. So, for the lack of a more esoteric, articulate term, God feeds off of our praises. That's his spiritual food. Okay?
Okay.
God loves it when we praise him, especially in groups. That's why he sent his son to die for us, so that we can commune with God, which is an impossible concept unless there is redemption.
Right.
Okay?
Wow.
Another question, and this will test your theological boundaries.
Okay.
Oh boy.
Are there, or can there be, objects which house the power of God if God wills it?
Yes.
Okay, give me an example.
Ark of the Covenant.
You got it. So why then is it such a hard thing to believe that a similar thing can happen in the occult world?
It's not.
Why not?
Right. And I'll even give you a biblical example to back that up, because I'm all about proof. When Moses was in front of Pharaoh's sorcerers, and there's no other word for it, what did the sorcerers do?
They threw their staffs down and they turned into serpents.
You got it. Now, the good news in that example is that the God's power was behind the snake that formed from Moses' staff, and God's snake ate up the snakes of the sorcerers. But the point is, the sorcerers could do a similar act. Don't forget that.
Right.
I think we miss that so often, and Christians and look past it. Satan copies, he twists it, but he copies everything God does. He doesn't create anything. He twists it, and he uses it for his own purposes. And we were talking earlier, and it just came to mind about your three big ideas is that evil is intentional, and it is organized and highly controlled. Well, if you read the Bible, you see that God definitely has a plan and he's sovereign, and you even make the point, what makes us think that Satan wouldn't also have his own quote-unquote sovereign plan, if you will?
Absolutely. For example, I'll just put this idea into your head. What makes you think that Zion isn't an equilateral pyramid? Right? It fits all the qualifications for the heavenly city. Why do you think the pyramids are so fascinating to people?
Wow.
And can you imagine the light of God illuminating the entire city at the capstone?
Well, Leonard, you're blowing my mind. Like, wow, I've never even thought of that.
Right. The river of life flowing from the capstone down upon the city in a waterfall.
Oh, man.
I mean, I could be wrong. I will admit that. But I know one thing, and I've said it for the 5th time tonight. You want to understand the occult world, look at the Bible first.
Absolutely.
Because the occult world just copies and twists Judeo-Christian tradition.
You know, on the occult world, Leonard, I've checked out, because there's a line in your. I think right now would be a really great time to bring up the line from your film that I emailed to you that I was just really, really fascinated by. And I'll just quote it here. You said in your film, after you covered 9/11 and different things, you were going into a little bit of prophecy, and you were going into those verses and showing the accuracy of the verses. And you said that the United States was allowed to become the world's biggest debtor nation when it became bankrupt in 1933, eventually along with all other nations, because your birth certificate is a bond. You are pledged as collateral on the debt of your nation. You are traded as a human resource on the stock exchanges of the world, especially in New York, the home to the world's largest stock exchange.
You got it. When you sign up for any kind of financial obligation, what are some of the questions the banker is going to ask you?
What's your social? Date of birth?
Yeah.
Where do you live?
Where do you live? How long have you worked at this particular job? Show me some proof of your income. Because the banker is assessing whether or not you are good for that loan. What determines whether or not a nation is good for its loans?
It's people that produce.
That's right. The human resource of that nation.
Resource. That's right. HR.
That's right. Now, that's right. And your income is known statistically because you are the product of your parents, and you are probably going to choose a profession similar to that of your parents. That is all known in terms of databases. When I buy insurance from my camera, the insurance provider had to look up actuarial tables for electronics theft in vehicles, because that's where I'm going to store some of my electronics when I'm on location, right? So when the Federal Reserve issues dozens of trillions of dollars, they have to assign the debt to someone or something, and they're assigning that debt to you.
Mm-hmm. It all goes back full circle.
Totally. And don't think for a minute that the current taxation rates won't increase. Because I'll tell you one thing. This just came off the wire this past month. France, in some cases, now has an income tax rate of 100%.
Oh.
And Poland 2 days ago pulled off a Cyprus 2.0. You thought Cyprus was bad? Well, get a load of this. Poland just confiscated half of all private pensions in that nation. And Detroit, we all know, was a basket case, has been a basket case for decades, but that finally came to fruition. And of course, when you declare bankruptcy, you look at your assets and your liabilities, and the bankers now obviously are interested in recovering the greatest liabilities. And the greatest liabilities were the pension funds of the public workers in that city. So about 78% on average of all the public sector employees' pensions in Detroit were just seized. Detroit will become the rest of America.
That is an uncomfortable thought, but true.
Now, some areas of America will get by relatively unscathed, but most won't.
Real quick, in reference to the birth certificate, I've tried to do some research on my own on this subject, and it's really tough to find accuracy because so many different people say so many different things, and as far as recourse and remedy and all that, but I'm not so concerned about that part of it as what we were talking about, the occult earlier in Babylon. I read in a book called The Redemption Manual. You may have heard of it. I don't know if you have. And I read this quote, and I'm not even sure if this quote is actually a real quote or not, but there's one from Colonel Mandel House, and and you may have heard the quote, and I don't know where to find it, but I don't know if you can verify if it is or not. But he says something to the degree that this is back in, I believe, 33, because this is the Social Security Act, right? Mm-hmm. So he says something to along the lines of this will be basically based on the ancient system of pledging. And have you heard anything about that? Does that ring a bell anywhere?
Yes, it does, because Colonel Edward Mandel House controlled FDR. He was a very charismatic person, very much like a Henry Kissinger or Zbigniew Brzezinski of his day. And your birth certificate is your pledge to the Federal Reserve. That's what justifies the issuance of debt.
And in regards to the ancient system of pledging, does that go back to Babylon?
Oh, yeah, because this goes back to slavery, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it got so bad that Isaiah told the Israelites, look, you're going to be led by fish hooks. And of course, I can imagine the Israelites going, what are you talking about? This crazy old prophet. And of course, the Babylonians loved to parade their slaves, right?
Yep,
as a conquest of war. And so the Babylonians took large hooks and shoved them into the jaws of the Israelites and led them around by their jaws.
Yep.
And they were slaves for how long? Far too long.
In one of your interviews with Rob Skiba,
Mm-hmm.
I by the way, my favorite of all of them, I mean, both you guys together was just
I will
phenomenal.
second that.
It's so funny you should say that, because when we get together, it's like two giants getting together and we feed off of each other.
You
and
do.
It's just amazing. I love talking to him because I could talk to him for 5 hours.
Oh, I'm sure.
Feel free to do it anytime and record it. We'd love to hear it.
Actually, on that topic, he quickly emailed me, and I was literally working out cycling, and he says, you want to be on the radio tonight? I'm going, you got to be kidding. I got 1 hour to prepare. You got to be serious. He goes, yeah, you want to talk about Zionism? I'm going, you got to be kidding. That's the most complicated, delicate topic, and you're giving me 1 hour to prepare? So I said, okay, I'll go for it. And we had a good conversation, and I will upload that conversation on YouTube, but I'm going to do it with a twist because I was so ill prepared, and I'm going to make a note of that on video, that I will add visuals to our conversation to support what I'm saying, because I literally had no time to prepare. I hate that. Mm-hmm. And I was saying a lot of off-the-cuff remarks that weren't accurate, but weren't specific enough, weren't backed with hard data. So I wanted to rescue that interview, and I will issue that interview shortly, along with about 5 others, including this one.
Awesome.
Well, we look forward to that. Real quick, I just want to say your interview with Rob Skiba introduced me to his films on the Nephilim, and that I'm a Bible student. I've gone to Bible college, and that blew my world open. And when you brought up the Nephilim and all that, I'd love to talk to you again about that sometime, but not tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it has been 2.5 hours.
Yeah, yes. We're sorry about that, Leonard.
You know what? Don't apologize, because this is the length of a football match, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm having a great time.
Way more.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, real quick, touching on what I was going to say about in reference to your interview with Rob Skiba, you talk about the meanings of words and how our English language is carefully constructed. And we've obviously demonstrated certain things already with George W. Bush and some of his phraseology that we don't understand, for instance. Now, in regards to that, when you spoke about all that, I honestly had no idea about that, but I'm a words person because of my past in writing and composing, and I found that just fascinating, so it kind of brought me into a new realm. And I was also into Kent Hovind, and when you talked about those words, I went on to Kent Hovind's Wikipedia. Unfortunately, I'm referencing a Wikipedia site here, but it was so interesting because in reference to what you said about the birth certificate and the Social Security card and all this stuff, and then the words being involved with that, I read his page totally different, because my dad had said something about, he was in prison, and I was like, what's he in prison for, So I read it, and the choice of words, to the average Joe, you don't really get what's going on. But when you read it, after understanding how legalese and all these different things that are in Black's Law Dictionary and Ballantyne's Law Dictionary and the different things that mean different things that we definitely don't get. It makes a lot more sense because it says, after being indicted, Hovind claimed incomprehension to the charges, telling the court, "I still don't understand what I'm being charged for and who is charging me." Now, since I've read that, initially back in the winter, they've definitely edited it because I remember them speaking more about, or there being more information on that, saying that they had to bring more people up there, and he still said that he didn't understand it, so they're making him look like he's just totally incompetent, you know what I'm saying? But he knows what he's saying, you know what I mean? And then it says, Magistrate Miles Davis asked Hovind if he spoke English, to which Hovind responded to some degree. And then they basically, indict him, and Hovind stated later, Hovind stated that he did not recognize the government's right to try him on tax fraud charges. And the word recognize is so important too, as well as understand, amongst so many other words. But I just want to thank you for pointing that out because it opened my whole world up.
That's right. When you say to a judge, yes, Your Honor, I understand, what you're saying is, I agree to stand under the rules of this court. So the moment you say, yes, I understand, you've just lost your argument. So Hovind's tactic appears to be dull, but it actually is a genius tactic, because what it indicates is an unwillingness to comply with the court's, kangaroo court's rulings. Now, Hovind is a very dangerous man because he speaks the truth.
Yeah, and that really is interesting because, since learning about just that in regards, because Daniel was a big Kent Hovind fan, and when I pointed that out to him,
I loved it in high school.
He was a huge fan growing up, and I kind of just recently was turned on to Hovind. And Daniel was like, well, he was, there's tax fraud. He's got to render unto Caesar. And I said, well, check this out, And it made so much more sense. And we were just like, this is so real, And it's interesting that, prior and after 9/11, the people that were calling out the New World Order, the truthers, so to speak, like Bill Cooper, Kent Hovind, Fritz Springmeier, John Todd, and Randall N. Baer were all completely silenced in some way, 3 of which were killed.
That's right. And if you want to connect the dots, just go to Google Images and type in income tax building. I think you're going to be surprised. Okay. Because it is loaded with Illuminati symbology.
Yeah. So I feel like that is such a huge topic, the birth certificate, and I don't want to cover it anymore in this interview. But are you going to be getting a little more in depth in any of your new films about that?
Maybe if I can find some clear documentation on the subject, because I only speak on what I can document.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people have opinions, but they have very little proof. Mm-hmm. So if I don't have proof, I don't talk about it.
And there's so many gray areas like corporate personhood, where you take a word and you change the word person to fit a business, or whomever to describe a business.
That's right. And on the topic of meanings of words, if you want to amuse yourself or fascinate yourself, get your hands on an original Webster's dictionary and just look up the meanings of words. It is amazing. Of course, Noah Webster was a Christian, and everything is defined in terms of Christian ideology. Mm-hmm. And of course, the words have been changed. If I told you 40 years ago that I'm feeling quite gay today, you would have had not a single issue with what I just said. But of course, gay doesn't mean the same thing that it does now, right?
Right.
Right.
And in the topics of words, as you said, how we've said how these words are changed. It's so interesting going into, you come from the university background, and every one of these professions, well, I shouldn't say every one because I can't document that, but a lot of these professions are rooted in, paganism. Even the profession, the name, like psychology, is based off of the logos of psyche, and you have Gaia and geology, and you have what was the other one? I can't even remember what the other
meteorology.
one was. Meteorology is meteora, and it's unbelievable.
Well, when you get your degree, like your Masonic degree, you stand up and you are given a parchment and you are on the square with your mortarboard cap. And of course, you eat 4 square meals a day, and you are taught only what you need to know to function like an automaton in a well-controlled society.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite sad to see how the entire graduation ceremony is based on Masonic traditions. And the whole legal system is based on Masonic traditions. The whole act of, placing your arm up in the air at a 90-degree angle, that's a Masonic signal.
Yeah. Moving on from that, I don't know how much longer you really want to talk to us here, so we don't want to keep you from whatever's going on.
Well, we'll get into one more set of questions and we'll call it a night.
Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to cover the 501c3 incorporation of churches, and in your film, at the very beginning, by the way, I've written everything down here. You've grouped the New World Order / Illuminati into 6 different groups, and I'm assuming, because I've heard you say in different interviews, that there are hundreds of denominations of the New World Order. And I don't see 100 yet on this page, but I can only imagine when you talk about the Masons and you go into, you talk about secret, clubs or secret societies or whatever. I mean, I think about the Knights Templar, and I think about me playing shows in Arlington Heights, Illinois, back in the early 2000s at the Knights of Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting. Like that was a place, that was a hot spot for bands to play, to rent that hall out. And now I'm thinking, well, who are the Knights of Columbus, right?
Oh yeah, I mean that is just Catholic Freemasonry.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, does it translate into like the Salvation Army, for instance? Because I'm noticing that the Masons like to ring the Salvation Army bell.
Well, we need to be very, very careful about that, because I don't connect dots that don't have connections.
Okay.
And unless I have specific proof that one thing is connected to another, I won't talk about it. For example, just in my research this week, I have documentation where the founder of the Red Cross in the Soviet Empire was driving around with a bank draft from JP Morgan of several $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So that is how the communists, or one of the ways that the communists in Russia were funded. They were funded through the Red Cross from American banksters. So I can stand up and say, look, here is the draft. Here's the money transfer. It's got this guy's signature on it. This guy was the founder of the Red Cross in the Soviet Union. A is connected to C through B.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what I do. I connect the dots based on actual documentation. And a lot of people just, they don't want to see it. But you know what? I tell people who are skeptics, look, you tell me, I won't believe it until I see it.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, you won't see it until you believe it.
Mm.
Very true.
So back on to what I was going to ask you here, with your groupings here of the Illuminati and the New World Order, you have the religious group, the educational group, intelligence group, political group, banking and money group, and secret societies group. And on the religious group, I don't know much about the World Council of Churches. and all these, I haven't really touched this whole aspect, but can you tell us a little bit about the 501c3 incorporation and maybe the relation to the World Council of Churches and what's really going on in America?
Okay, the 501c3 designation is, of course, a tax exemption. And a lot of churches would be up the creek financially if it wasn't for that 501c3 designation. They just wouldn't have enough income. So I find it hilarious that in your nation, which values free speech so much that you can't make any kind of quote unquote political statement in a church if you want to keep your 501c3 designation. So right there, you do not have the freedom of speech that you think you have. So you do not have a anti-war movement within the church. And on that topic, I say, you know what? America was founded by renegade congregations who, on the Battle of Lexington Green, if my American history doesn't fail me right at this moment, that churches literally organized themselves against the British. And the American tradition of the pastor standing outside the church or in the entrance to the church at the end of a service goes back to the pastors during revolutionary times being the first people out the door to make sure the British weren't aiming guns at them. Right. So I tell people, you want to preach to me Romans 13, that's fine. But America wouldn't exist if it weren't for the renegade congregations who rose up against the British. So know your own history. Know how you're being controlled through tax designation. It's all about the money. And 501c3 designation is a Rothschild creation or Rockefeller creation. And so he who controls the gold controls the world, right? It's the world's golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules.
Right. And how does that play into the World Council of Churches? Because I really don't know much about the World Council of Churches.
The Rockefellers, in addition to pushing for 501c3 designation, also established the World Council of Churches, just as they established the United Nations. Mm-hmm. And the entire goal of the World Council of Churches is to promote ecumenicism.
Right.
And so the Rockefellers are absolute geniuses because as you promote, cross-cultural understanding, whatever that means, you're going to water down your theology. So the Rockefellers just set up a structure and they let churches fall into that structure in the interest of, peace, love, and harmony.
Yeah.
So the Rockefellers don't have to be behind every conspiracy in a formal sense. They can just set up an organization and let it perpetuate the goals of the Rockefellers without the organization even being aware that it's doing so.
Mm-hmm. Now, just to bring this kind of full circle to the average Joe who's, watching Fox News with the 501c3 tax-exempt organizations, let's just bring this in context with the Boy Scouts. What's going on with that whole situation?
The Boy Scouts were originally, if I'm not mistaken, founded by a Freemason, and it has Freemasonic roots. Now, that doesn't mean that if your kid joins the Boy Scouts, he's going to become a Freemason. What that does mean is that it implants patriotism as a pseudo-religion. And I find it very interesting that the ACLU has been the driving force behind homosexuals in the Boy Scouts. And although the Jewish Boy Scouts of America don't have to follow that guideline. And the ACLU is a Jewish-led organization, or is highly Jewish influenced.
So with when we're watching the news, for instance, and they talk about this whole thing with the 501c3 status, the state of California is going against the Boy Scouts and wants to revoke that status, when if they're successful, they say they'll go after the church. Now, what they don't mention about revoking the status, as far as when an entity, purposely unincorporates itself or goes through the courts to do that, the proper procedure, that's fine and, that works out. But when somebody basically gets them to have it revoked, there are penalties to that. And what they don't mention is that this organization essentially would have to pay all these back taxes. Is that not correct?
Oh, that is something I'm not aware of, but that is a distinct possibility.
Because
that could be a huge factor. I was not aware of that.
Which, if you could verify that, we would appreciate that. But if that's true, essentially, that would break the Judeo-Christian church's back in America overnight if that was revoked. Like, gone.
I would agree. The best way to control people is to control them financially.
Right. And if you can rule against churches and say they're not, falling in line, if you will, with, your policies that they signed up to promote with being that organization and being, first off, a corporation and not a church, because you're two things, not one that was originally intended by Christ. Mm-hmm. They can take that away from you and then charge you all the back taxes on everything that you've ever gotten a tax exempt status on or deal on.
Well, that is a distinct possibility. I can't confirm that, but I will tell you this. The bankers will get away with what they think they can get away with. Mm-hmm. And this is a very delicate point because in Romania about 20 years ago under Nicolae Ceausescu, he thought he was in control. And he did the classic thing which all dictators do, which was he showed off his wealth. And the elite of the world who are successful, what I like to call them successful parasites, never destroy their host. And they're never really visually, they don't visually manifest themselves. But Ceausescu did. He flaunted his wealth too much. Mm-hmm. And he thought he was in control. There was a huge parade in Romania. And there's video of him waving to the crowd as though he was in control. And then at some point in the wave, he realized that he had a riot on his hand. And there's video of him literally going from a smile to a look of absolute horror in about 5 seconds, because he realized that at that point, I've lost control. They're going to kill me. And that's exactly what happened. So he was a foolish control freak. The control freaks who are successful have handed down their successful techniques for at least 250 years. And they will get as much as they think they can get away with. And so far, they've been getting away with everything.
Well, Leonard, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk to two guys who just really were touched by your film. And I just really quickly, before we part ways here, I wanted to just let you know, I mean, you know how it is seeing God's signs, before you all the time. And it's like you can't get away from it. You know what I'm saying? And for me, as soon as I came upon your film, I would take breaks from this New World Order stuff, okay? I would just take breaks because it would just like kind of engulf me, and my wife would be like, you need to lay off this conspiracy stuff, you know what I'm saying, or whatever they want to call it. And I ended up taking many breaks, and always somehow something comes up at church. I'm not kidding. Something you wouldn't think would just pop up in the sermon. And it would just be a word that would throw me right back in, Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I feel like God's trying to tell me something. And then when we were, basically my uncle and I were traveling to another campground to buy one of their products from them. And we kind of went on the fly. We're very much perceivers in the Myers-Briggs description, not really people who like to plan things out all the time. We like to kind of have adventure. And so the initial thing was we were going down to Pennsylvania, and we were buying a trailer from these people. And then the next day we would leave our campground and head to Michigan to go buy this water slide, essentially, okay, for the campground. And anyways, when we got to Pennsylvania to buy this trailer, the people ringing us up were Christians, and they were actually part of like a co-op for homeschool, okay? And this is so interesting because my phone was practically dead. I didn't have my computer with me. I mean, I was unplugged almost, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I get there, and this guy's talking about how he used to do field trips for their students. And he says, yeah, he's like, we used to take them to Washington D.C. and I know that city like the back of my hand. And I go, so you take them to the Federal Reserve? And he said, oh, it's not federal and there's no reserves. and Leonard, like, honestly, I don't know what to say. You know what I mean? I'm just like, oh my gosh, what are you trying to tell me, God? And so then we leave Pennsylvania, and we are on our way back to New York. And about an hour into the trip, my uncle goes, yeah, what do you say we head to Michigan now? And of course, my personality type, I'm like, yeah, let's do it, adventure. And so we just, plug it into the GPS. We go all the way to Michigan. The next day, we're loading up the slide, right? And this is the trippiest part, because I had already had my whole entrance into this New World Order thing was through like I had said previously, was through the Federal Reserve and my realization of that. And because it was something that I could actually latch onto proof-wise, And I'm loading the trailer with this guy from Texas, and he's talking to me about the Battle of, like the Alamo and Santa Ana and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I don't have much knowledge of Texas's history. I'm still pretty void of that. But he's informing me all these things, and he's basically talking about Santa Ana, and that Santa Ana was a Mason, and they spared Santa Ana because he went into a Masonic prayer. And I go, is that a good thing? And he says, well, yeah, because we're all Masons. And I go, are you a Mason? And he's like, yeah, are you? And this is, I'm not making this up, Leonard. I mean, this is trippy stuff. And I'm like, no, I'm not a Mason, but I'm highly fascinated in, the whole founding of the country and everything. Can you tell me more? And so he starts going into all these stories, and he's a third degree Master Mason, okay? And just, bottom level. And he says to me, basically, when he lived in Texas, that he was applying at the police to be an officer of, some sort of deputy or whatever. I don't know all the ranks, but somewhere in the police force, right? And he gets there, and whoever the guy that he's seeing that's higher up, the chief or whoever, basically he goes into this stance in front of the chief, which is a Masonic stance, and shows a sign. And the chief then goes into that same stance and lets him know that he knows that sign, Yep. And he says this is what the chief says to this guy that I'm talking to. He says, have you been on any trips?
Yes.
And he goes,
yes.
And he goes,
that is a specific Masonic reference.
And he says, yes, I have.
I've traveled far.
And then he says, how many trips have you been on? And he answers 3, which again symbolizes his third degree.
That's right.
Now, he was supposed to continue and take a bunch of, do an interview and all these other things. He says he didn't have to take a single interview or anything. He's like, that's fine, you're a Mason, you're hired.
Yep.
And then he went on to say that when he'd get pulled over by police officers, he would just flash a Masonic symbol, and he'd be no ticket, no nothing. And then went further and talked about how the Masons control all the county lines in Texas.
Well, there's a reason why Texas is called the Lone Star State.
Mm-hmm.
And you can guess about that.
Well,
and there's a reason why there's a lone star over the Kremlin in the former Soviet Union.
Oh.
And I just wanted to share that story with you because I can't make that up, Leonard. I mean, that was literally God putting me in those circumstances when I'm supposed to be taking a break from it.
We are surrounded by the Matrix.
Uh-huh.
And Volume 3 opens up with that infamous scene between Morpheus and Neo.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't quote that scene because I can, because that goes over and over again in my head, and I've memorized it, and it's so true.
Yeah.
Because once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I think we should close because it's been 3 hours.
Yeah,
Yes.
Thank you for your time, Leonard. And I just ask, would you like to close in a prayer with us?
Absolutely. Okay, here we go. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the simple, pure truth of the gospel, which has never changed, which has been written before time, which has always applied across cultures, across places. I thank you so much that you never change. And in spite of the fact that this world is increasingly going through changes, which are generally not good, that you cannot kill a Christian. You can only change his address. And I thank you so much for the pure truth of the gospel, because with or without life on this earth, we win only through you. So it should be no problem witnessing to the people at work, people that don't believe in our family, and even people that have warmed a pew for decades and have never really committed themselves to Christ. May we realize that the fields are ripe for the harvest. May we place all our trust in you and no trust whatsoever in the things of this world. Amen.
Amen.
All right, Leonard. Well, we've definitely enjoyed this. Thank you very much. And hopefully, if we didn't stretch you out too much in these 3 hours, we'd like to do it again sometime, but we can figure that out at a later time.
Sure. And let's get this thing uploaded. Give me your MP3 file, and I will splice it up with my recording, and I will upload it. And I've got about 7,800 subscribers. So my channel's got some pull.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Leonard. We'd really appreciate it.
Well, anytime, Sam, Dan, it's been a pleasure.
And again,
Pleasure's been
if
ours.
you do come down here, I will put you up with a place. If we're jam-packed, with campers, I can't guarantee a cabin or anything, but at least a tenting site, if not my own house. And like I said, I know other people who have KOAs as well that I may be able to get you a discount at. So.
Well, Sam, that's a generous offer, and I'll tell you what, you are in God's country out there, because you do not want to be in any metropolitan area when it all goes down, and you got access to plenty of good drinking water, so you're exactly where you should be.
Leonard, I want to thank you for saying that. I've seen the Jericho series, turned on to it by you and Rob Skiba in your first interview, and that freaks me out a little.
Well, what did Jesus say? I mean, if he didn't come back fast enough, there would be no flesh left.
True.
Now, that means it's a pretty depressing thing to say, but this world is not our home.
Yep.
Right. Just boot camp.
You got it.
Thanks, Leonard.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good night, guys.
You too.
You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Oh, you have my email address, right?
I do have your email address, and I will be sending you that audio. I'll mix it down. I'll try to get it done tonight, if not tomorrow. And I may email you here and there to just ask you questions about certain things, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely.
And I may as well, so you'll see my email.
Great.
Thanks, Leonard, so much. God
Okay,
bless.
thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Dude.
Did that wrap it up nicely with that story?
That was perfect. Dude, this was awesome. I love it.
This gives him truth to see effects on people and interest.
Yeah. Dude, that was awesome. I'm so excited for those other interviews, especially the Skiba one. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to have to re-listen to just this interview like over and over again.
I couldn't even like...